So, welcome everyone. I'm Claudio Garcia, president of the Outthinker Strategy Network. I'm glad that you could join us today. So, just to give you some background, today we are talking about beyond the hierarchy, what companies are doing, how they are transforming their organization designs. So, basically, we are seeing a lot of transformation in the world right now, of course. I mean, a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of transformation. Digital has been a very important variable to change business model, to change the way we interact as organizations with customers, with society as well. So too many things. And there is Gary Hamel used to say that the innovation that we are seeing, products, business models, client experience are not being followed by the same kind of innovation within the enterprise, within the organizations. So there are few organizations around the world trying new things, change new things. And what we did was, in the last year, the Outthinker Strategy Network invested a lot of time and resource to investigate, to research about what's happening there, which are the cases, which are the models that are emerging from this transformation that society is passing through. So today we are going in more depth about this topic. It's an end of the year, it's an end of the cycle about all the research that we did. And we have a very strong agenda today, as you will see. We will start with Kai-Han Krippendorf, that is the founder of the Outthinker Strategy Network, my partner in crime in the network of strategy leaders around the world that are dedicated to learn from each other and to go in depth in topics like this. And after that, we'll have one real case of how a company is transforming the way it operates and bringing new ways to operate in a different world. That is GE. We have here the pleasure to have Kevin Nolan, the president, the CEO of GE Appliances. It will be very interesting to see. After that, we'll have a session with three amazing thought leaders that many of you probably know. We have Rita McGrath from Columbia University. We have Martin Reeves from the Henderson Institute from BCG, the research arm from BCG, and we have Tony O'Driscoll from Duke University. So very good people. And at the end, we'll come with the members of the Outthinker Strategy Network, the practitioners, strategy leaders that have responsibility to transform their businesses to this new reality. So you see how they are reacting, how they are thinking about these transformations that we are going to hear through this session. So we will start today with Kai-Han. I just want to give a quick introduction about Kai-Han for those that don't know Kai-Han. So Kai-Han is the founder, as I said, of the Outthinker Strategy Network. He is a strategy and innovation expert, both academically and as a practitioner. He's the author of 5 best-selling books, a globally recognized business thinker, a fast company blogger. He's also a professor of NYU and the Florida International University, and he has been recognized by Thinkers 50, that is our partner in this session today, and Global Gurus as a world-leading thinker for his work in strategy innovation. So I want to thank, of course, Thinkers 50, and I want to thank you, the Business Ecosystem Alliance, for partnering with us to make that a reality. And now I want to welcome Kai-Han. Kai-Han, thank you for coming today to talk to us. We would love to hear from you.
Claudio, thank you so much for the introduction, and it is great to be here with everyone. I just wanted to open up with sharing some of the findings that we have recently assembled, which set the stage for this event, Beyond Hierarchy. And if we think about who are the innovators that we consider are those that are going to shape society and shape industries, if we look at lists of most innovative people, we often see people listed who don't work within established organizations. We say, who are the big innovators in business? We look at the lists. They're dominated by these people: Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Michael Dell and Elon Musk and Airbnb founders and Zuckerberg and the Google founders. And what we see is that they have all operated outside of established hierarchies. You also see that they're all white men. You'll see that they share a remarkably similar story. They got an idea sometime in college when they were young, and then they moved to the West Coast, and they went to the mecca of innovation. And I want to make a point here that the fact that there's such similarity in their stories indicates that their stories cannot be true. Like, we cannot believe that it has to be a young white man that is an innovator, that you need to be a young white man to innovate. We know that's not true. So it must put in suspicion whether this narrative is actually the truth, or whether this narrative is simply the kind of story that we like to tell, the kind of story that sells books, that sells magazines, that captures eyeballs. Because the similarity of their stories continues. They put together a small team. They've got a hipster, a hacker, a hustler, and they step into a proverbial cave. In this case, this is Hewlett-Packard's cave. This is the Hewlett-Packard garage. They work on an innovation, and then they unleash it on the world. And so there is this commonly held, and I argue, and I will prove, misheld belief that in order to really innovate and change industries, societies, the world, you need to do that independently, outside of the confines of an established organizational structure. Let me tell you why that's not true. We looked at the 30 most transformative innovations of the last 3 decades. This isn't our list. This is a list that was collated by a group of Wharton professors based off of thousands of submissions. And these are the big innovations. This is like the internet, email, DNA sequencing, MRIs, like the big innovations. And we looked at who conceived of the idea, who then developed the idea, and then who then scaled the idea. And we don't have time to go through all of these and explore all of the interesting implications from it. But if I could just focus you on the left side of your screen under conceived, you kind of squint your eyes, what you'll see is that the blue represents entrepreneurs, people operating outside of established hierarchies, and the red represents internal innovators, people who are operating within established structures. And what we see is that 70% of society's most impactful innovations have come not from entrepreneurs, but from employees. So let's sit with that for a second. What that means is that there is a 70% chance that the next innovation that will significantly impact society is going to come from an employee working inside of established companies. What it means is that we would live in a radically inferior world if it were not for the possibility of employees to innovate. So I'm not even saying that this is difficult, but it's possible. I am saying that it is difficult to be an entrepreneur, as it is difficult to be an intrapreneur, but that is actually the most prominent form of impactful innovation. If it were not possible for employees to innovate, you would not have a mobile phone. If you did, you wouldn't be able to connect it to the internet. If you did connect to the internet, you wouldn't be able to send an email. You wouldn't be able to write a Word document. You wouldn't, if you got sick, you couldn't get an MRI. You couldn't get a stent. You would live in a radically inferior world if it were not for employee innovators operating from within established hierarchies and companies and bureaucracies. That is the source of innovation. So we interviewed 150 internal innovators, and we asked them, what were the challenges that you face when you seek to do something new inside a company? And 7 barriers appear frequently. The first is intent, that it may be that you or they or your people have lost the intent to innovate. You've tried so many times and been told so many times you've given up. The next is need, is that people inside companies often don't understand what the company needs. They don't understand the strategy. Less than 40% of mid-level managers can name even 2 of their company's top strategic priorities. So what we need to do is we need to close the gap between what is our strategy and people understanding where to innovate so it aligns with the strategy. The next is options, that sometimes we come up with too few options. We need 50, 100 options, ideas to explore. If we myopically focus on just a few, then if that idea turns out not to be a good idea, we don't want to pivot and look for the next idea. So we're looking for a portfolio of options. The next is value blockers. This is where there is business model conflict between an innovative idea and the established business model. So if we can learn how to reconcile that, like the way that you want to price this idea is inconsistent with the way that your company currently prices it, the way that you want to market it, the way that you want to recruit for it, how you want to organize yourself is inconsistent with the norms. That's the next barrier. The following barrier is ACT, which is acting on experience. On experiments. You have an idea, and what we need to do, especially if it's a new idea, is we need to take action on the idea in order to prove that it's an idea. But our companies often ask us to prove the idea before we can take action on the idea. I sometimes I say we need to do it to prove it, but our companies ask us to prove it to do it. For example, HP, when it developed the first electronic calculator, research said that they should shelve the idea because there was already an entrenched competitor that was superior to the electronic calculator, which of course was the slide rule. And the argument was, why would anyone buy an electronic calculator when you have a slide rule? But HP decided to take action on the idea. They made 1,000 of them, and before long they were selling 1,000 a day. After you have been able to identify how to take action on the idea before you prove it, the next challenge is assembling a cross-functional team. And the problem with siloed, hierarchical structures in which you divide labor either by specialty or by business is that in order to take action on the initial idea, you have to pull together a fast-moving cross-functional team. We need to collaborate with people from finance and engineering and marketing. And those people don't all report to the same person. And so it's hard to pull together the people that will take the initial steps on the idea. And then finally, there is a bundle of environmental factors, things around leadership, around organizational structure, what talent that you recruit, how you develop, and what your cultural norms are. So these are the 7 barriers that we find internal innovators struggle with when they're looking to innovate from within. And what we're going to see today is that there are new innovations in how organizations structure themselves that help loosen up these barriers. To understand that, let's look at what work is. We think of work, having a job, as being something that is traditional. But actually, the word job is a relatively recent phenomenon. In the 1800s, very few people had jobs. This is a photo of a gentleman. He was a farmer in the United States, and he wasn't just a farmer. He was also a watchmaker, and he would tinker with and repair watches. Because he was a watchmaker, he was also an inventor. He'd invent interesting, useful devices. But his real passion was a magician. He wanted to be a magician. He would use his expertise in tinkering and mechanical design to build interesting magic tricks, like a box, and when you open it up, it looks like it's empty, but then you close it and a secret contraption opens up, and then inside, and you can pull out a rabbit, for example. So this is how people lived in the 1800s. They didn't have a job. They had many different jobs. And as you can see here, only 20% of people in the United States, but I think that correlates also within Europe and other countries, had jobs in the 1800s. But then, as we started formalizing how we organize ourselves, introducing approaches like line production, what we started seeing is people had jobs. And by the 1950s, the reality had completely flipped. 90% of people then had jobs, and only 10% did not have jobs. So the rise of the job, you can see very clearly in the frequency with which the word job is used in books and magazines and later online. And what we see is from the 1920s to the 1960s, we suddenly started talking about jobs. We never talked about jobs before the 1920s, and suddenly it was almost the only thing we talked about. And the reason, as Ronald Coase, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, described and laid out for us in his Coase theorem, it's because of transaction costs. That when it is less expensive to organize people inside a firm than the firm wins. And it takes away coordination efforts from the marketplace. So you can have internal transaction costs within a company, and these companies then will do things like identifying workers, selecting them, giving them roles and jobs, monitoring their performance. And that is all more efficient in certain circumstances within a hierarchy, because it's cheaper for you to give someone a contract to have a job rather than every day, if you're opening up your factory, try to recruit new people and train them and onboard them. However, that is changing. That new technologies are allowing the marketplace to start stealing from the firm things that the firm used to be more efficient in providing. For example, I recently moved from Connecticut to Miami, and we tried to use a hierarchical provider, a firm that would organize people to repair things and move things and unpack things and install windows and paint things. But it turned out to be very frustratingly inefficient. So instead, I started using a platform called TaskRabbit. And what TaskRabbit allows you to do is very efficiently is identify people who do certain things. They maybe their specialties at plumbing or at doing electrical installations or cleaning. I can identify them, I can select them, I can contract with them, and I can monitor their performance and give them reviews based off of their performance. And this platform ends up being more efficient than the hierarchical one. And that's just one small example of where we see something other than a hierarchy being more competitive than a hierarchy. Still today, most of our organizations are designed like centrally planned economies. And as the rate of change and diversity of options that a company must monitor and pursue proliferate, what we see is that in some areas, and we're excited to hear today in which areas this is the case, in some areas, the hierarchy becomes less competitive than its alternatives. Hierarchies are reaching a breaking point. As Jack Welch said, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the rate is the end is near. So what's happening is companies need to react more quickly than a traditional hierarchical structure allows them to do. My favorite phrasing of kind of what they're talking about here is Gary Hamel, who's written a lot about this. And he said something like, by the time an opportunity is identified and it goes up the ladder, a decision is made, and that decision goes back down the ladder, then the opportunity is already gone. And so what we're seeing is hierarchies reaching this breaking point. And the reason that we show a wave here, starts cresting when the rate at which it moves on the bottom near the shore, near the sand, becomes slower than the rate it's moving at the top, then it falls over. So we are reaching in some areas this breaking point. Now, there are very few companies that are purely run as hierarchies. And in fact, there are multiple ways and maybe informal methods by which companies make decisions and coordinate human effort. John Malone, a professor at MIT Sloan, who wrote many influential papers and several books, in his book, Superminds, he lays out 5 different ways in which people coordinate themselves. There are certainly hierarchies, which we're talking about today. There are also marketplaces. These could be external marketplaces, to be internal marketplaces. For example, when I moved here, I was tapping in an external marketplace to search for, find, and contract workers to work in my house. There are democracies. And even in a hierarchical organization, at the very top, there is a form of democracy where you have a board that is supposed to represent shareholders, and shareholders can vote on the board, and the board can make votes that dictate decisions of the company. So there are already democracies at work in hierarchical organizations. There are communities, groups who have an informal shared identity and coordinate each other, coordinate themselves and make decisions together. And there's also ecosystems as well, both ecosystems inside your company and ecosystems outside of your company. So it's a simplification to say, oh, it is hierarchy or not hierarchy. And one thing that we're going to explore today with experts and practitioners is how and where do these different forms of coordination, where are those more competitive? Where are they more applicable? In what kinds of situations and decisions? We're also going to learn a lot about this structure that Haier has introduced called Rendenhai. We're going to hear from the CEO of GE Appliances, and he's going to talk about really how this model works inside GE Appliances. So just a little background on Haier, if you're not familiar with them. They're an appliance maker. They bought GE Appliances about 5 years ago. After they bought GE Appliances, their total revenue was $15 billion. Since buying them, so this is after the increase in revenue from the acquisition, they grew from 15 billion to 32 billion in revenue in just 5 years. How do they do that? Well, if you ask them, what they'll say, it is by introducing a new form of human coordination. They broke down their hierarchy into 4,000 micro enterprises. Each of these micro enterprises has a CEO. That CEO leads a group of people. Those people can replace the CEO and vote out the CEO of this micro enterprise if they don't think that he or she is doing a good job. So we've taken a hierarchy, broken it down to small hierarchies, and we've introduced a democracy into the governance of that. Then they said, what about our functional units? What about accounting? What about R&D? What about IT? And what they decided they should do is also break those down into micro enterprises. And those micro enterprises have to sell their services into the micro enterprises that are market facing. And if you are running a micro enterprise and you don't think that you're getting good service from your IT department, well, you could actually choose a different IT department within Haier, or you could even go outside of Haier and you can choose someone else. So what that does is it turns these cost structures, these cost functions into revenue functions. They need to sell their services internally. And if they're not able to sell their services internally, that means they're not providing sufficient value, and effectively their budget is cut, but not through a centralized hierarchical structure, but rather through an internal marketplace. We've shared this with many companies, large US companies, and they're really intrigued by this idea and this structure. And we're going to get to today to hear how that actually works. So we wanted to understand this structure a little bit more and understand what are some specific things that we can show increase a company's performance if they adopt elements of this Rendenhai model or similar models to it. And we surveyed 500 mid-level managers with decision-making capabilities, and we tested out 8 different attributes. We found 4 for which there is a strong, statistically significant correlation between this characteristic and their ability to recruit and retain top talent and their overall financial performance. So I'm going to lay these out for you, and then we'll get to the program here. So we asked a group of questions, and 2 of the questions were, on a scale of 1 to 5, state whether you completely disagree or strongly agree, and then there are ranges in between 1 to 5 on the statement, we are better than our competition at recruiting and retaining top talent. That'll give you a talent score. Then we asked the same question for financial performance. Over the last 3 years, we have significantly outperformed our competition and done so consistently. 1, strongly disagree. 5, strongly agree. And then we asked a few other questions. We asked, in my company, our company treats people like entrepreneurs rather than employees. You can rate that 1 to 5. 1 is strongly disagree, 5 is strongly agree. And what we found is, again, these are highly statistically significant. We're talking about the probability that there is no correlation of being less than 0.2%. So there is a clear correlation here. Now let's look at the magnitude of that correlation. If you treat your people like entrepreneurs rather than employees, you will have a 1.6 times advantage on recruiting and retaining top talent. In other words, the probability that you are better than your competition at recruiting and retaining top talent is 1.6 times higher than a company, your competitor, that treats people like employees. How about financial performance? A 1.4 times. So you're going to outperform your competition by 40%, you could say, if you treat your people like entrepreneurs. Just that one statement, I think, is profound, because what we need to do, recognizing that 70% of society's most impactful innovations have come from employees, we need to start embracing the fact that they have agency and creativity, and they have innovativeness, and they can act as productive entrepreneurs, and you will outperform your competition if you do that. Then we looked at this question. We primarily operate as business units, or we operate in small decentralized teams that are like micro enterprises. We also see a statistically significant correlation between this element of the Redenheim model and performance. You will be 20% better at recruiting and retaining top talent. You will outperform your competition by a factor of 1.3. And I want to say something about these numbers here. You know, the difference in performance between a gold medal winner and a non-medaling athlete in the Olympics is something like 2%. So here we're talking about 30%. That can make the difference between you being the gold medalist or you just being someone who just ran with the pack. Then, do we make budgeting decisions based off of centralized hierarchical control, or do we make that through an internal marketplace? And again, we see a statistically significant correlation. If you manage through an internal marketplace rather than centralized control, you are going to be 50% better at recruiting and retaining top talent and 30% more likely to outperform your competition. And the last one, which I'm personally really excited about, and when I present this, I find a lot of resonance for this idea, this possibility, and excited today to get into how you can actually make this happen, is the question, do we require people to adopt designated shared services? In other words, do we tell people this is the IT department, you need to work with this IT department? This is the R&D department, you need to work with the R&D department? Or do we give them a choice of shared services? Do we let them say, I don't like the service I'm getting from that IT department, I'm going to go to a different IT department? And what we see again is a strong correlation. You will be 60% more successful at recruiting and retaining top talent, and you will be 30% superior in your financial performance. So these are just 4 elements that I think we can all understand and start implementing within our organizations that will enable us to outperform our competition in talent recruitment, retention, and in financial performance. And this is the first time that we've seen, at least, and we've looked at other studies, a clear, statistically significant correlation between elements of something that can start looking like an alternative to the hierarchy, or maybe a complement to the hierarchy, and performance. And so what today is about, what I'm excited about learning about today, is what are the first steps that we can take to start shifting beyond hierarchy. Very excited to be here with you. Thanks, Claudio.
Okay, so thank you, Kaihan. I hope you all have enjoyed. For those joining right now, welcome to the Beyond Hierarchy Summit. So now, I mean, we saw this model that Kaihan showed about how a higher approach, like the situation of being more adaptable to this world that we're seeing right now. But we will have now, I mean, the pleasure to see like how that is in reality, in action, with the president and CEO of GE Appliances, Kevin Nolan, that will be here with us in a second. So he will, of course, show to us in more details and have a conversation with us about how he implemented this model, how he was successful implement this complete different model that we are seeing in more in most of the organizations. They still have like a hierarchical model, a more traditional model. So, and to talk to him, we also have a Kalina Nikolova here, that is one of our members of the strategy, Thinker Strategy Network, but her main role is as vice president of business operation and strategy at Yahoo. So I welcome both of them. We initially will hear more about Kevin, and we will have this conversation with Kalina. Of course, and if you have questions, please comment in the chat. Wherever you are, if you're on YouTube or if you're on LinkedIn, please just comment and we will try to use as many as possible. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Claudio. And Kevin, good morning. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. I'm super excited and very humbled to talk to you today. I do want to say a very special thank you from me personally, and of course from everybody. As Claudio said, I'm one of the probably first members of OutThinker, and it has been a critical part for all of us who are part of that network, because we continue recognizing that we have to think and update ourselves with the latest thinking. And it's truly thanks to business leaders and thought leaders like you who come to share their experiences and their wonderful practices with us that we are able to do that. So thanks again. And I think we would love to kind of pause and step back and just give you a few minutes to tell us about the model. Kaihan kind of set it up a little bit as a larger theory, some amazing research results. But let's spend a few minutes listening to you. How did you come up with the model, implement the model? What was it meant to you?
Okay, excellent. Everyone, you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, so I had a presentation, but due to some technical difficulties, you're probably lucky or unlucky, you'll see me, not the slides, but I'll talk through it quickly to give a high level of what our transformation's been like, and I guess what are the key elements of it. I guess first, full disclosure, the numbers were a little off as far as what our transformations delivered. When we were sold to Haier, we were around a $5.5 billion business around 6 years ago. And this year we'll end around $11 billion, organically growing. So I think the numbers are a little different, but the story is the same of really a good turnaround for our company. So GE Appliances, and you can tell from the name, was part of GE. And we were part of the original GE. So if you go all the way back to Thomas Edison, our company brought residential refrigerators into the market. This kind of innovations has really changed the lifestyle of folks around the world. And so we have this history, we have this American iconic company that people know of. When you really think about GE, you would think light bulbs and appliances and really the electrification of America. And we've always been very proud of that history, proud of who we were. But I think that pride sometimes got in the way of us moving forward, us transforming, us changing. And we're relying on our past, our history, and not really looking forward into the future of what can we be, who can we be as a company. I've been here a long time. I came right out of university into the General Electric company, been in appliances from the 90s. But all that time before Haier, we were a company that really didn't have any significant growth. We were flatlined really for 25 years or so, around the same size. We had, I would say, incremental innovation coming at us, but we didn't realize we had really become a bureaucratic company, very top-down driven. It wasn't nimble, we weren't market-focused, and I think it was shown because we weren't growing. So then Haier came into the picture. And Haier to us was a very foreign company. And not foreign because Chinese, because we've been dealing with a lot of different Chinese companies for years. And my background, I'm an engineer. So I spent a lot of time over there developing products, doing different things. But Haier never really did OEM business. So we never had business with Haier. We knew about them as a company. But they were kind of a closed door company from our viewpoint. Because they were one that was very brand proud. They didn't feel like they needed to ever go into markets through others. They would want to go through themselves. They had not been successful in America. They had tried to come into America. And so our view of them was a company that was really not that progressive, not that well performing, but they were now our owners. So in 2016, we had a lot of soul searching. What's going to be the future? We left this iconic company to this company we didn't know. So I spent really the first year of that acquisition, 2016, over in Qingdao, where our headquarters are, and really just trying to see who is this company, what are they about, and is this a place personally I want to work for, and do I think this is going to be a good future? Because I would say initially, our view was fairly negative when you looked at just employees in our company. And when I was over there, at first it was almost what I expected. Kind of a crazy company that wasn't very organized and a lot of different things going on. But then I started hearing things, a different way of doing business. I didn't understand what they were saying and I didn't know how to see them. When I went there, I asked first thing from a GE standpoint, you ask for an org chart. Where do I stand? And they don't have org charts. So it was a very hard company to really dissect, understand who and what these folks are. So I kept spending time there and trying to understand how is work done. And as an engineer, I kind of always start with the ground level, and then how does work done, how does that work serve the customer? And it got to, I would say, a revelation of this company that was really just purely customer focused. When I was one that I would say was very focused on what did management want. And the void of what I was used to made it very hard for me to understand. And it wasn't the fact that it was a different language they were speaking, a different country I was living in. It was really a different approach to running a business that I had never been exposed to and didn't really understand. But I'd say what we did through this is I started to dissect what's really the essence of what was going on here. Because I knew what they did wouldn't work in America. And I think that was an important thing for me too, to say, hey, our markets are mature. You look at China, there's still a lack of penetration of some major types of appliances. So they were in a stage of growth that the US company maybe was going through in the 1950s. So I said, that might have worked, and it was probably what our company was like back then, but it doesn't work now. It doesn't work with our customers. It won't work with our consumers. And so initially I kind of wrote it off of, this doesn't apply. It's not going to help us. But then I started really trying to think through, is there something here? Because I also had to look at reality. We weren't really that successful as a company. Why did we get sold? And so there was a lot of soul searching going on. And I'd say I came up with kind of what was the essence of Rondon Hoodie. And there was a couple things. One is we needed to have a goal. And what Haier talks about is a leading goal. So we need a leading goal. We need a culture that focuses on entrepreneurship, and a culture that focuses on the customer. We need a structure of organization that encourages that culture. And then we need to reward people who exhibit the behaviors that we think are truly customer focused and driving towards our leading goal. So those, I'd say, are the four fundamentals behind Rondon Hoodie. What I had to rethink of, what do we need to do to put those in place. So the first thing, the goal. When I became CEO, I said, okay, we need a leading goal. And the leading goal that I wanted, I felt it was one that our employees wanted, is we want to win. We want to be number one. And that was nothing that was ever talked about before. We were number 4 or 5, and we were kind of slowly going down the pecking order of appliance companies in North America. So the bold thing was, we're going to be number one. We want to be number one in 5 years. And that, I believed that we had a chance because I believed in our people. But I think when I started saying that, they're like, what's this crazy technology guy talking about being number one? That's not who we are or who we are ever expected to be. The next is culture. I said we got to change our culture to be customer focused, to stop being upwardly looking at management. So we had to change things there, and the way we changed that was through structure. And we were a very functionally led organization, and we quickly pivoted to change the power structure of the company. And we came up with our own version of microenterprises. And what I initially did was very simple. I took our 4 major product lines and said, you're now microenterprises, and that the platforms, which were called functions, serve the microenterprises, not vice versa. So the microenterprises are the ones that make the decisions. They were going to be the ones that understand what the consumer wants and make sure they've got their own leading goal in place that rolls up to what we want to be number one, and that they would drive their businesses to that end goal. And then we changed the reward structure. Before, we all won or lost together as a company. We thought that was a good thing because it had a lot of camaraderie and it kept us together. And there was always talk about, oh, GE Appliances is special because we stick together through tough times and good times. Now, it was mostly tough times we were sticking together through, but we felt that was important. And when I said, no, what's more important is winning. And if we win, we're all going to be happier. And let's see if we can take that away and give individual targets to individual microenterprises and start things moving. Right away, we started to see a change. We started to see decisions being made quick, decisions being made at market speed. And we had to change the role of people like myself, the CEO. I could not tell a microenterprise what to do. I could only be there to support a microenterprise. So we tried to re-put who's in charge. Right? The CEO's job in this structure is not to be the boss, it's to support the microenterprises. The functions, manufacturing, distribution, sales, their job is to support the microenterprise. So we had to put the microenterprise in charge of budgets, in charge of decision making, and then measure them on their performance. So they were accountable. So we also had to put accountability down into the organization. And year one, I'd say we started with those 4 microenterprises, but then we saw something special starting, is employees starting to see opportunities, market space, and saying, hey, I think we can achieve this. Much to the extent that we see happen in High Air and Qingdao, is we started to grow new microenterprises. And those microenterprises weren't given from a strategy department. They weren't centrally driven. They were driven by employees seeing opportunities and putting people in charge that had passion. Before, we had talent reviews and all kinds of career pathing, different things. And in many ways, we threw that away and said, well, we want to err on the side of passion. We want leaders, and that's what I see in entrepreneurs. You never meet an entrepreneur that isn't passionate about what they're driving and what they can achieve. They might not have all the experience, but the passion seems to overwhelm. And so our view is if we can put passion in front, and then we can support it through experience on platforms that we have, and we can help those grow in a way that other entrepreneurs don't have. We have brands, we have structure, we have processes. But those processes are there to serve the microenterprises. They're not there to serve themselves, is what I think happened. And so now we have about 14 microenterprises. These things still evolve. I still think we need more. I'd say we're at the beginning of our transformation. So after 5 years, we did become number one. We hit our goal that people thought was totally unachievable. So we're now the largest appliance company in North America. And we felt quickly we have to change that leading goal, because your leading goal always has to push you somewhere new. So we're sitting now at around an $11 billion, $12 billion company. We've got our sights the next 5 years. How do we grow to $24, $25 billion? And to do that, we know the path, we know the way. It has to be continuing to embrace these learnings, continuing to keep dissecting the company. So as the company gets bigger, we have to keep making it smaller. And I think that's the problem most companies run into, is you grow, bureaucracy creeps in, and you slow down, and then these small competitors, they can come up and they can, in the end, outpace like they did with us. So this is all about being a big company, but when our customers see it, we need to be the smallest company out there. And we're finding that through COVID, through the kind of crisis we've had, and even right now with the economic crisis, we're a team that reacts quicker. We react at market speed. So the bigger we get, the faster we're getting. And I think that's kind of the secret behind what Jair was able to put together with this theory of Rondon Hui. Now, that word, I'm not Chinese, and I apologize to anyone in the audience that is, because I know I'm butchering it. And so what we like to use is zero distance. So the goal of our company, fundamentally overarching strategy that guides everything we do, is we need to be zero distance with the customer. That's bringing us into very exciting and interesting spaces. Because now when we talk about innovation, we talk about how we're going to bring value, we need to work with our customers. So the term of co-creation is really central to what we do now. So our innovation, our changes are driven through co-creation. And co-creation means us and the consumer become one, and we work on solutions that they value, that they want. And we believe that's how we're going to drive profitability, continued profitability for our company. So in short, I would say that's a brief synopsis of our journey, what we've been through, and kind of where we're going.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was amazing. I was taking a lot of notes. I have a few t-shirt slogans ready from what you said. Let me follow up on a couple of things. And for all the strategists and leaders here that are thinking in their heads, okay, is this right for me? Should I start now? Should I start later? You mentioned a couple of times it was a time of soul searching. It was a time when the company wasn't growing, was getting bought, etc. Should we all wait for a big crisis moment to do something like this? Or how should we think about it, even in the good times?
Yeah, and I think that's a question I've asked myself a lot. Why did it take us being sold to do this? Because to me, it's very basic, and the employees love it. So this is something that employees will embrace. But I think the trick is leadership needs to give up their power. And that's a very difficult thing. So how many companies have a CEO? Like, one of the main advantages I have is I didn't want to be in this position. I wasn't giving anything up. Okay, it wasn't power that I was set my career on achieving. So I think for companies to transform, it's a leadership decision, and leadership to transform in this manner has to give up a lot of the fruits of their labor. You know, you got to give up this fancy office where you can order people to. You know, we gave up all kinds of things, company jets, all the trappings of hierarchy. Symbolically, I said we have to destroy it. I have to be I'm another employee trying to serve customers. And I think that's what's critical to the transformation. And what does it take leaders to have that kind of leap of faith that if I give up power, I actually achieve more? And I think that's the crux of the problem, is most leaders don't want to give up what they've achieved.
Great point. And I'm thinking in my head, three questions. Which one do I want to go with first? So you said the four things that you think define the model, kind of the leading goal, the culture, the structure that supports the culture, rewarding the zero distance, or the behaviors that are zero distance to customer. Let me talk about culture, because you just talked about the mindset has to change. We have to give up certain things, certain beliefs. When I like to say, I mean, I don't say that. Culture eats strategy for lunch, for sure. I like to say operations also eats strategy for lunch as well, if you don't set it up properly to actually execute. So let's talk about some of what happened when you started thinking about this. What were some of the first things that you had to kind of sell through, quote unquote, through the organization to get even started? I mean, often in the Outthinker network, we have this conversation, oh, this is great in theory. Where do I even start? What is like a step one that gets me on the right path towards changing that mindset, on the right path towards starting those new operational principles? Where do we start?
Yeah, I think some is a fundamental belief in your people. You know, because you see a lot of times you come in and a business isn't performing, you hire in consultants, and there's a lot of evaluation of, oh, we need new management team, right? And you need new people. And one of the things I wanted to prove, the issues with our performance was not the people, it was the system, it was the environment we were working in. And so I think the thing that helped was a fundamental belief in people and the people we have. And I think with that, if you have the belief in people, then you'll have the belief that I can give them the power, I can give them the authority, and they're going to act in a responsible way and achieve things. So I think you have to do that. And I think doing little experiments on the peripheral, they might be interesting, but they don't prove it because you need the whole enterprise to get behind this. Because you can have a micro enterprise, but a micro enterprise needs to be supported by the company, supported by your brand, supported by your distribution, your manufacturing, different, because you still need expertise. So I'd say the secret we're trying to do is have an entrepreneurial-based company that's driven by entrepreneurs, but is supported by professionals that know their trade very well. And I think that's the beauty of what Hire did is, as a micro enterprise leader, if you think distribution is not performing, you have the right to go do something different. So there needs to be a lot of internal pressures because internally companies all have monopolies. Your HR department is one of the best monopolies, right? You have no choice. But monopolies aren't a good thing, okay? Anyone in business knows, do you want to run a company through monopoly thinking? It never grows. You're the power company. And most of us, if you really analyze it, you're running a company with these monopoly fiefdoms in there and expecting entrepreneurial growth and results. So you have to change that. You have to change that power system so you don't have monopolies within your company.
So let's get a little bit into that. Like, what are some of the cornerstones of making that change? Certainly breaking down the org charts and creating, as you called it, you started with like 4 micro enterprises, you're at 14 right now. Certainly creating those fundamental structures is critical. But I want to hear a little bit more about, you said belief in the people, give them the authority. Let's talk about some of the other structural things. Literally things like performance reviews. Like what are you expecting people to do? What is a good performance? How do you redefine that? Things like budget allocations, like who gets all those experts and resources, and how do you evaluate regularly, which ones are working well, which ones aren't. So let's get into some of those, maybe 2 or 3 cornerstones of that new structure.
Yeah, so I'd say performance appraisal is an interesting one. We're not maybe as far as I would like to be because we still do them, but I think they're not right. Because ultimately, the performance needs to be driven by the market. So the market gives us our performance appraisal. And I think the more we break our company down, the more there's market feedback into individuals. And it's a micro enterprise, can it ever get to an individual level? So I think if you truly choose zero distance, you no longer need performance appraisals, right? Because you're getting them. Just think if you own a small restaurant, I guarantee a small restaurant owner isn't given a big performance appraisal. They know their performance because they look every night and see are the tables full or not. Our company needs to be more like that, where you're looking at your own restaurant and do you have new customers coming in or are you losing the ones that you had? And so I think this thing of every company has to have this big talent process, this big career pathing. Why can't we let the market determine that? And I think too many times companies are trying to be in control of something that they fundamentally are not. And let the market decide. And that's what our reward structure is all around, is your performance should be driven by market. And I think what it's led us to do too is put people, if you really want to drive diversity and inclusion, it helps because it helps you strip away your biases. It helps you because your biases are there, but it needs to be more based on performance, not on the way someone appears and presents and talks. So a lot of it is how do you get your company more blind to biases? And that if you really want to see the talent you have, get rid of your biases because you've got talent that's amazing that isn't bringing their whole self to work. And I think that I like the market to decide what that is and let people feel that challenge. So we're still evolving on that, but I think that's part of the essence of this is stop managers thinking that they can control everything because they can't, and start seeing what's the hidden value in our employees that can in the end bring more value to the company.
I love that you mentioned the diversity and bias. I want to come back to that in a second. before I go to that topic, definitely want to spend a few minutes there. You said something earlier about co-creating with customers. It's, of course, it's like everybody's like, yeah, of course you have to listen to your customers, but actually doing it is a very interesting concept. So this notion of not only listening to the customers, but also co-creating with customers. Does that connect with some of the things that you have initiated? I mean, you're a technology leader before a CEO. You're a maker yourself. You've created the maker space at GE Appliances. Do you invite customers to those? Like how? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is an entity we created really before High Air, and it was kind of out of frustration of bureaucracy. We're trying to break away from it, but it's called First Build. It's located off campus on the University of Louisville campus, and it keeps evolving. But what it is, it's a way to rethink how does a company do innovation, because most companies have an innovation pipeline, and everyone does, because without it, you can't keep bringing value. But after running that for years, it doesn't work. And I think if anyone really looks at the value that their innovation process, or look at the value of your innovative new products, are they really that great? Are they really changing things? We didn't feel they were. So we said there's got to be a better way, and we started First Build. And I'd say First Build is really starting to get into its stride now. And what First Build is it is no management control. So what First Build works on is only what customers want. So the whole innovation process here is driven by, and not even customers, outside people. So they test all kinds of ideas, and if no one cares about them, they're not allowed to work on them. And I can't kill a project there. No one can. Only customers can. So it's really an experiment with what happens when you put the company's direction, strategy, everything in the hands of outside people, not inside. And what we see now is a ton of innovation coming out of there, and I would say meaningful innovation, more than we've ever seen before coming into our company. And it's driven by passionate areas, and sometimes things that are on the fringe. We've done things for the sight impaired. We've innovated with them. We found people in our community. We didn't know the House of Braille here, where all the Braille books in America are written, is in Louisville, Kentucky. Well, they know the problems they have being served properly, and they're not happy with it. So we get together, and what do you need to serve? Now, we know how to do things, but we don't know what people want. So we've kind of put it to, and there's theory behind this, of user innovation and producer. We're a producer. But producers are the one that always try to innovate. But the real innovation comes out of the users. So we're trying to let the users do the innovation, and we bring our expertise on how to do the engineering. But we don't try to tell them what they want or what they should want. And you think most companies hide behind a wall, develop something, and then launch it and tell everyone this is what you need. We don't start that way. We say, what do you want? Let's create it together. And we've come out with a host of new things. The first big hit out of there was the nugget ice maker, Opal Nugget Ice. And it's probably one of our biggest sellers, our most profitable. It is our probably most profitable product right now. But that was just the start of us starting to bring out new kind of things the industry had never seen before. We have an indoor, what we call hearth oven, that can cook pizza, Neapolitan pizza, in 1 minute and 40 seconds. Gets up to 1,400 degrees in your house. Never been able to be done before. But it was co-created with people that were crazy about making pizza. We didn't know that you really need to get that hot, you need to do those things. We worked with the Jewish community, helping the Jewish community, how do they adhere to their religion in a better way than is possible with the kind of appliances kitchen. So time and time again, we're into areas that we don't know what the payback is, we don't know what the value is, but we know the customers want it. So we have faith if we deliver it, there's going to be value created. And so it's not started with financial foreblocks and all the kind of hurdles with a company. It's just started with, this looks cool, let's go do it. Now they're constrained because one of the rules at First Build is they have to at least be break even. So they know that, and we also say you got to develop at least 12 new things a year. So we put a lot of pressure on that entity but we also are very careful with how it's operated. And it works. Like during these tough times, I think a lot of companies, first things you cut is your marketing and your innovation buckets. Like I tell you, one thing at GE Appliances we didn't cut was our innovation budget, because why would you? It makes money for us. So we actually have innovation as a profit center, where most people look at innovation as a cost center. And I think that's the beauty when you can really drive this, and I think that's the extreme of what Haier is pushing towards. Now, we've done it in a entity, now can we do it at scale? Now that's really what our next chapter is about, is co-creating at scale with a company, which I don't think's really been done before.
You certainly have the foundation, and I want to talk about metrics a little bit, because you're giving me a good segue. You just said, like, we're putting pressure on these units, to be performing well, to fund themselves, to be profitable. Tell us about the metrics. What are the success metrics? You're saying, well, the market is your success metric, but what are some examples, specifically what you're looking at, and what happens when something is not working? Like, how quickly do you kill it? I'm curious also.
Yeah, so I'd say if you look at our micro enterprises at GE Appliances, the metrics are pretty simple, similar to what everyone has. We're looking at revenue, cash flow, and EBIT, right? Those are the basics of are you running a healthy business. You look at first build, it gets a little bit different. And I think that's what we're trying to learn on new products, new innovation, because most of your investments hopefully are either capacity because you got a hit and you need more of it, or it's innovation and you feel there's huge opportunity. And that's what you should be using your capital for. So if you look at first build, their metrics become much different. It's not about what's the available market. We don't look at any of those traditional things. We look at, is there a passionate group of consumers out there that care about this? And are they willing to care enough to actually get involved with us to create it? And then once we do that, we start working on it, and we start getting it out there, and we start selling things very quick, because our time to market, we said, has to be extreme. So we try to get to market in months, 3 months, 4 months, of actually get a product in someone's hands and sell it, and then get feedback, and start this feedback loop with a customer. So we're able to now, and I think through a bunch of flexible manufacturing, a lot of the new things we have today is you can put high fidelity units out in the customer's hands much quicker than you could in the past. I'd say that's our secret at first build. So our metric is start selling right away. You can see what your price elasticity is. And then we'll sell things that don't work well, which sounds just crazy. I mean, we've sold things that don't work. And we're upfront with the customer of, hey, please help us. We think this is cool, but it's not working right. And we'll put it in their hands, and we'll start engineering together and designing and fixing and working. So the metrics there are much different of, do we see increased, like we'll put on YouTube, social media, do we see an increase in followers or a decrease? And I'd say first build kills more things than they kill things automatically, because typically engineers, we get in love with our ideas. So we have a lot down there that says that cannot happen. We only need consumers to be in love with the ideas. We don't care what we feel. We only care what they feel.
And that is such a fundamental, wonderful way to put it. Because I was going to ask the next question. You're almost like answering it with this. I want to talk about obstacles. Let's talk about the negative, the dark side of this, the obstacles, the resistance, people just kind of either not understanding or being afraid. What were some of the examples you encountered, and how did you deal with them?
I'd say, we're still encountering it. I would say if you look at how our micro enterprises work, a lot of the micro enterprises leaders, fundamentally, they still want to control, right? So, okay, maybe it's not me controlling, but I've just pushed the control levers down in the company. And so there's a lot of fear of the first build model, because first build, there's a product they were working on, this indoor smoker. So how do you smoke, ribs and everything in your kitchen, inside? I thought it was the dumbest idea ever. I tried to kill it as the engineer in me. I said, it's a bad idea. People loved it. They kept working. I wasn't allowed to do that. And that's getting launched. It's getting launched out into the marketplace now. And I realized I don't like smoked meat. So of course I'm not going to support that program. And I think that fact of really losing your control as a micro enterprise leader. So I'm still seeing micro enterprise leaders go through many of the traditional marketing and customer research, it works in very mature categories. So if we're going to develop a new top-mount refrigerator, which is the low-end refrigerator sold here, we know those customers. We've been serving those customers for 100 years. And so we the traditional marketing methods, they work for incremental innovation. But if you want innovation that's really going to drive profitability, drive growth in your company, I would say those traditional ones don't work because everybody has them. So your competitors are going to be as good at doing it as you are. You have no advantage. So a lot of this too is, I would say this theory is you've got to know your competitors, right? And you've got to attack the market in a different way than they're willing. And I think what I like about co-creation, zero distance, most companies won't follow it because it takes the leadership change. There's a two-edged sword. Most companies aren't going to transform because the leaders won't let it. But the good thing is that those that do transform, you can rest assured your competitors probably won't.
Another t-shirt slogan I have here. Thank you. Really, really interesting conversation, and how I mean, I'm literally having a pit in my stomach just thinking about some of these things. Like, that's not how we do things, and yet it sounds logical. It sounds amazing to kind of get to that place at zero distance with the customer. So would love to, for the last maybe one or two questions, they're kind of related topics in my head. Would love to maybe expand kind of outside of the walls of GE Appliances. You mentioned diversity. You mentioned getting involved with different communities. I want to connect the dots on that and just maybe talk about the larger notion of sustainability and social enterprise. Like, I would imagine with everything you said, there's a shortened distance to that as well, as with this new culture and with this new way of thinking. Tell us more about that. How do you feel like more engaged as an enterprise, as employees, in the topics of, diversity, removing bias, sustainability more broadly, community engagement? Would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, every company is going to talk about diversity and inclusion. You won't get a CEO that says they're against it. Every company is going to talk about sustainability. You will never find a CEO that says, I don't care about well, you might find some, but in general, they're never going to say, I don't care about the environment and the world, right, in the future. So to me, if that was true, they all cared, then we wouldn't be living the way we're living. So to me, it's all lip service, right? So don't believe what CEOs say, believe in what they do, believe in their actions. And that's all you can look at. And that's what I tell employees about me. Just don't listen to my rhetoric. Just look at the actions of the company. And I think what happens is the more you can get into this model, you start seeing down the organization, you start giving people a voice. And the extreme voice is down at First Build. So I usually am down there on the weekends. I mean, there's always people down there doing something. And what I learned first is that we underestimate our capability time and time again. I've become a much better engineer in the last 8 years because I'm down there getting taught by students, by kids. I mean, literally science fair kids. So you start realizing you don't know all the answers, and a lot of people do. And once you see that, you'll listen more. And then you start seeing, where do they want to drive? What are the kind of projects they want? What do they want to work on? And if you give them that opportunity, I think it all starts to be a virtuous circle, right? You start appreciating diversity more because you see the value it's going to bring into your company. The diversity starts feeling more empowered, so they start having a voice. And at the same time, the kind of programs you're working on, if people have a voice, they'll stand up, and it kind of self-regulates. Hey, should we really be doing that? Is that the right area to get into? So I think really listen to people. And if you look at the youth, we should have a lot of optimism of the future because the youth is sending us in a good direction. They need counseling, they need coaching, but we need to listen to them. And I think if you listen to them, it's going to be a better place.
Really, really love that. Reminder for all of us to continue giving back our thoughts to community and learning, being humble to learn from students, as you said. That's absolutely amazing. I want to start kind of going to closure. I'm curious, X many years later now, you have learned a lot about, yourself, your organization, your leaders. You guys have changed a lot and continue to change and transform. Do you think Hire has learned something from you?
I hope so. I think the good thing about Hire is it is kind of a learning culture. But at the same time, we've had a lot of success, we've moved forward, but the tendency to move backwards is greater than the tendency to move forwards. And I feel that. When the road gets a little rocky, it gets bumpy, everyone wants to go back to their traditions, go back to what they've known from before to get them through those tough times. And they want to forget the new path we're going on. So I'd say, if anything, what I worry about myself, have we learned enough? Have we learned from ourselves? And are we going to revert back to the old ways? And is this truly sustainable? And if we learn this is a better path? And I'd say that takes a ton of effort, because there's a tendency to, again, go back to the way things are done. I mean, you bring consultants, you bring people in. All the conventional wisdom tells you what we're doing isn't right. And if I go amongst peers, a lot of peers say, you're crazy. That's not the way you run a business. That's not the way you allocate capital. That's not. So if you listen to the wisdom out there, you start doubting yourself, and you'll go back to the old traits. And you have to have a lot of self-confidence and will that this is a better path. And I'd say that's what I worry about more than I worry is Hire learning something. I worry, are we learning something? And are we really going on this path in the future?
That sounds amazing. A lot of great leadership thinking here. Really, really appreciate it. I do want to start maybe get to a slightly more personal, quote unquote, question. I want to take it kind of to the holidays and say what's on Kevin's holiday wish list. It could be something personal, something from work. Anything. Would love to know, I don't know, the top 2-3 things on your wish list.
So I'd say personal wish list, I've got a new project I'm working on. I'm trying to make a CNC lathe, so I'm on figuring all that out. So my personal thing, I'm looking forward to some days off so I can actually get time to work on that project, because I've been doing too much real work and not enough the work I want to do. So I'd say that's my personal thing. Can I achieve that over the holiday? And then I think when I look into next year, how do we, because it's been tough times, we can see things turning. And how do we get, the continued growth and things and work through next year? Because I just wish, we've had 3 very difficult years, the whole world has. And, we've been through a pandemic, we're right now through, recession, global economic crisis, war in Europe. And what we wish can we get a year where we can just go back and work? And I think these last 3 have been tough. So I wish that we can it's always going to be tough, but I think we've been dealing with extreme measures.
So true. Thank you for saying that. Any final takeaways you want to leave us with for today's session?
No, I just think, I appreciate, I think all of us, the more we can have things like this and learn from each other, because that's what it takes. None of us know the right path, the right answer. But how do you get rid of conventional wisdom and start really working amongst others of what's really working in today and in the future? And I think what you're doing here is super important, and I appreciate it.
We appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much, Kevin. I have personally learned a lot. Again, always humbled and ready to listen and learn more. And I am sure all of our listeners today the same. Appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had enjoyed the session with Kevin. I personally enjoyed it a lot, and I'll comment in a minute. So for those joining right now, welcome to the session. We are going now with a very interesting session with like people that I admire a lot. I will comment on them in a minute. So please, if you have questions, you have the comment function on YouTube or LinkedIn. And please don't hesitate to ask. I will be paying attention here to make sure we bring your questions to the speaker. So let me introduce them right now. So very amazing people. So I will start introducing Rita McGrath. I think many of you know her. She's a best-selling author. I have her book here with me. One of my favorite books, actually, Seeing Around Corners. I have a dedicatory, actually, from Rita here. For Claudio, Snow Melts. Rita, I love that. So Rita, she is a longtime professor of Columbia Business School. She's widely recognized as a premier expert on lead innovation and growth during times of uncertainty. So many awards. I mean, few of them. She received the Achievement Award for Strategy from Thinkers 50. That many of you know, and it's one of the partners in the session here today. And he have been consistently named one of the top 10 management thinkers in the world. So I showed like this book, but there are many others. I love discovery-driven innovation, the ad of competitive advantage, so many things here. So thank you, Rita, for joining us. Second person that I want to introduce, Tony O'Driscoll, professor, speaker, author, advisor. I also have a book from Tony, the last book, Everyday Superhero. Love the book. Very interesting. It's a book that you can read in 1-2 hours. Insightful, straight message. Thank you, Tony, for joining us today. So more about Tony. Tony teaches at Duke University, Fuqua School of Business, and Pratt School of Engineering. And of course, he is also a research fellow at Duke University, Duke Corporate Education. And he focuses a lot on like applying cutting-edge academic research to increasingly complex business challenge. So he's one of my favorite persons to have a chat. When you have a chance, I'm always talking to him. So thank you, Tony, for joining here. And the last one, Martin Reeves. I also have a book of Martin, the last one, The Imagination Machine. I had a lot of fun reading. I don't have a dedicatory yet. I'm sure I will have soon. So Martin, thank you for joining. Martin, for those that don't know him, he's a senior partner at BCG San Francisco office and chairman of the BCG Henderson Institute. So he explored a lot of ideas about beyond the world of business. He's maybe is the most interesting generalist that I know, that I have interacted with. So he is co-author of this book that I showed here, The Imagination Machine, but many others. I love the other one that is Your Strategy Needs a Strategy, How to Choose and Execute the Right Approach. So thank you, all of you. Let me start this session here. I want to start with you, Tony. It's very insightful, what we heard right now from Kevin. Zero distance from the customers, budgeted decisions on the edge. I saw Rita commenting on the chat. So marketplace for internal functions and the business ecosystem kind of approach with clients. It's very different. But what I would love to explore and start with you is about what's the opportunity here? What is the signal? We see so many times companies trying different models, different approach to organize them for a changing world. But what's the message here? Even more coming from a company that was not like a startup, but a kind of traditional company.
Yeah, I think it comes down to leadership. I had the great privilege of being with Kevin a couple of weeks ago, and he walks the talk. When he says, I'm not going to kill the smoker, just because I don't like smoked meat doesn't mean that there's not a market for it. And how should I be the one to stop the marketplace from creating? So what I took away is you need a micro enterprise of hipsters, hackers, and hustlers. And then you need a cave that's big enough to invite the customer in and co-create. Now that's easy enough to say, and you can see these same kind of patterns of, and Rita talks a lot about this, of the sense making happens at the edge. Snow melts from the edges is what Rita likes to say. And we tend to, in organizations, be cocooned in the middle. I don't necessarily want to say just in a hierarchy, but it's kind of like we live in our cocoon, so we don't feel that the heat at the edge or the cold at the edge as much because we're kind of isolated or insulated, if you will. And this turns the model on its head. It kind of says the central functions are there to support those micro enterprises. as they co-create with customers. And then you get the kind of the paradox of the bigger you grow, the faster you go. And that doesn't seem to hold up to logic when you work within a hierarchical system where kind of all the information has to flow in and up and decisions have to get made and pushed back out and down. And the latency effect of that kind of decision making and the kind of throttling of idea flow inside the organization then kind of essentially makes it regress to a mean of mediocrity, that you can't essentially kind of keep pace with the market, which is something that Kevin said. But I feel, we all look to leadership, and unless leadership kind of essentially demonstrates change behavior as opposed to demanding it, you're not going to get the change you heard about today with GE, in my opinion.
No, thanks so much. Thanks so much. Let me move to Rita right now. And Rita, I want to take your insights about this session with Kevin as well. But I mean, I love like that. I mean, there's like this challenge, this tension between efficiency, adaptability that we've seen even more happening right now during COVID and during like a lot of like challenge we had in the world right now. And your work, it's a lot about that. It's like bringing like this flexibility, adaptability to the way we think about strategy in organizations. But I would love to see your thoughts about this session with Kevin, how that, which are the insights you get to recommend organizations to pay attention to.
Well, one of the things that really struck me about Kevin's observations was the effect of power. And how, if you really want to create a company that behaves this way, you have to be willing to give up power. And that means giving up the executive jet, and that means giving up the corner office and all the trappings of hierarchy. And, when I reflect back on the companies I've worked with that have come to grief, very often there's a strong association with executive perks. So I'll just pick on GE for a minute, classic GE, where Kevin came from, right? And I remember being up at Crotonville, which was their big training facility. By the way, it's now for sale, which is a dagger to the heart of many of us who taught there for many, many years. But you'd have Jeff Immelt like arriving in his helicopter, and it was the chairman has arrived, right? And it was all that power and that sense of here's the person with a view across the whole enterprise who's going to make these enterprise-wide decisions, and all that power and all those perks. And I think in organizations, what we've come to confuse is the generation of real value with the trappings of power and rewards and the perks that all that comes with. And I think Kevin put it very well. He said, if that's what you're going for, you're never going to operate this way. If what you want is the corner office and the private jet and the corporate helicopter, this is totally antithetical to what you want, but it also is antithetical to what the customer wants.
No, I love that. And I think there's a lot of implications that I want to explore later about how we think about leadership, career, managing people, management process as well. Let me go to Martin. Martin, I've read a lot of your work, and you do a lot of research about how organizations find new designs or new features of design to try to respond to this world right there. And one thing that you have discussed a lot in your articles is about like the role of technology coming and like many AI and how that have a very huge potential about how it's going to impact organizations. It's going to impact like the role of leaders, the role of professionals. I mean, coming to this topic, like beyond hierarchy, new models, and the role of strategy, would you comment on this? How do you see like the tendencies, the trends that we could explore as organizations?
Yeah, it's great to be here with you all, and a wonderful topic. Maybe let me begin with some clarifying of thinking, because words can be treacherous. So there is a sense in which heavy top-down structures are obsoleted by technology or are required to change. But the first thing I'd say is let's not be too rapid in writing off bureaucracy. I mean, hierarchical organization is prevalent in nature. It's the basis for military commands. It put a man on the moon. So I think there's a confusion between a structure and some behaviors that we associate when that structure is employed by large corporates. So large corporates can be slow, they can be conservative, they can be introverted. I'd treat that as a bug rather than a feature of bureaucracy. Now, I think technology is forcing us to do a number of things differently. It's forcing us to be faster. Algorithmic speeds are very fast. I think it is taking away some operations from humans. So when we embrace alternative organizational structures, maybe we should even consider more radical alternatives. Bureaucracy literally means the rule at the desk. I think already we're in the realm of computocracy, which is the rule of computation. So something a bit like a bureaucracy but more flexible may not be going quite far enough in the conception. A third thing to think about here, I think, is that my experience is that structure guarantees nothing. I'm naturally very curious, so I love going to see the Huawei structure or the Zappos structure. But one of the things I have to say is that I went in pursuit of novelty, but I think you can find ordinary. I think you can find incompetent. I think you can find effective within any structure. And so let us not pin too many hopes on the variable structure. I prefer to think in terms of strategies, what I call the strategy stack. So it used to be when I first joined BCG that there were strategy projects, there were organizational projects, there were procurement projects. I personally have not done a strategy project for about 20 years that didn't also involve organization and technology and human relations. So I think what you need to think about is, coherent systems of management that touch all of these things, rather than just saying, hierarchy is bad, let's do away with that and everything will be fine. But that's sort of like a little bit of clarification of the words, which I think can trip us up. So let me just give some headlines for how I think technology is changing strategy in business, and then we can maybe dig into some of that. So I think I was thinking about this the other day. I think there are sort of 6 ways in which strategy and management is changing relative to 1989 when I joined BCG. I think one of them is speed. I think we have to do things faster. We know that competitive advantage decays about 10 times faster than it used to. So we have to be fast. I think another one is uncertainty. Not just, we had a crisis, so things are uncertain, but persistent multidimensional uncertainty, where we have to think about geopolitics and society and all those things at the same time. I think a third one is openness. Most times people talk about organization, they talk about their organization. Ecosystems are beyond the organization. Politics is beyond the organization. I think a lot more is happening beyond the organization. The context of the company is as important as what's happening in the company. The fourth one, which is really revolutionary, is algorithmic, which is, it's already the case. Maybe some very traditional companies don't realize just how much it's progressed, but algorithmic decision-making is a major part of many businesses. And that presents all sorts of issues and opportunities that we can dig into. I think the fifth one is contingency. In other words, my analysis says that the range of competitive conditions is now so great that you shouldn't look for the one way of doing strategy, the one way of doing organization. You should rather ask, in this situation, for this particular business at this time, what is the best way of approaching this problem? And then the last one is, I guess I've already touched on it, under openness, which is contextuality, which is think about influence, not control, because many of the people you need to influence don't actually work for you. 99% of the people touched by Alibaba and Amazon don't work for those two companies, so they need influence mechanisms, not control mechanisms. So I think that that's the stuff which is changing, which changes the context of everything in strategy and management. I wouldn't reach for one alternative to hierarchy and write off hierarchy entirely. And I think it's about strategy and organization. What is it? It's a tool to get a job done. So it's whatever copes best with those circumstances. And maybe we don't have all the answers yet. One of the interesting things that's happening in strategy right now is a lot of the innovation is in practice. Sometimes in strategy, theory leads practice, and sometimes practice leads theory. I think right now practice is leading theory. So it's an exciting time to be a strategist.
No, I see that. I mean, one question that comes to my mind is that even if there is not a model that is one model fits all, there may be features that we need to pay attention. I think you comment some of them, like influencing, that the border of the organization is kind of mingle with like other realities. So this concept of business ecosystem, that, I mean, I love like when he says zero distance from the client, that you're so connected with the client that the speed of innovation happens there, and it's difficult to track if you're not engaged with them. So come back to you, Rita. I mean, how do you see like these feature change? Because we still have like, for example, budget in organizations that are the traditional one, investors expecting the forecast, so this whole mechanism that are the traditional in organization that needs to shift to not one different model, but different features, how do we interact with them? I would love to hear from you about like this shift that we should expect happening.
Well, so with budgeting specifically, there's some fantastic work that's been done by a group called the Beyond Budgeting Institute, in which they talk about budgeting being a very different exercise in this sort of annual painful ritual where, you forecast a little bit less than you think you can deliver, and your boss is pushing you to forecast a little bit more than you think you can deliver, and it's just this horrible negotiation, all premised on the idea that next year is going to be a lot like last year, right? So budgeting in its traditional form has a lot of flaws, which I think we're now beginning to recognize. And with today's technology, you can re-budget things very quickly. I remember talking to Sanjay Purohit, who was the head of Infosys strategy group for many years. And he said, we re-budget the entire company every quarter. He said, we're a growth company. I don't want 4 quarters to go by before I find out what the hell's going on, right? And so that flexibility of being able to adapt your resources as your demands are placed upon your organization, I think that's something that we're starting to see becoming more and more the norm, and less this kind of painful annual fixed budget. This is what you got for an entire year. I mean, if you think about it, that's crazy, right? That things would remain static for an entire year. So I think that's changing. I think we're seeing a lot that's really shifting. One of the things I talk about is I call it a new playbook for strategy. And it really has to do with accepting that change is the normal thing, not stability. And that's a big shift, right? I mean, strategy itself came from industrial economics, which makes 2 assumptions. Industries exist and the normal state of things is equilibrium. And, I think the first principle of the new playbook is no, the normal state of things is not necessarily equilibrium. Second, we have to get smarter about stopping stuff. So I call that healthy disengagement. How do we get out of things that are no longer serving our purpose as well? And, Kevin didn't mention this, but I know that at Hire, one of the things they're very good at right now is, if something doesn't get a critical mass of interest from customers or stakeholders or whatever, it kind of dies. I mean, it doesn't get to live on, right? Third thing is this resource question, which gets to budgeting, which is how do you get your best resources against your best opportunities? Fourth, we need innovation as a proficiency, right? Not a thing that happens once every 4 years. And let's do a boot camp. Let's have innovation theater. Thousands of Post-it notes, die a horrible death while we ideate. We need to make it a real proficiency. Fifth, this has huge implications for leadership. And we need leaders who are, as Kevin described, very discovery driven. What's the new information I've got to work with? What does that suggest I need to be thinking about now? And lastly, all of this takes place against a backdrop of the people. And increasingly, what we're seeing is a tour of duty talent environment where people will sign up for something, they'll stick with it for a while, and then situations change, the job gets done, they're ready for a new challenge, and maybe you can't provide it, maybe they leave, maybe they come back. Much different talent situation than we would have had historically. So I think we are looking at a new playbook.
No, I love that. I use that as a segue to go back to Tony about leadership. You started with leadership, Tony, and it's not only the implication for leaders, how do they behave, the predominant kind of behaviors and leadership skills, but it's also for the whole leadership system that we understand today for organizations, how you manage talent, how you recognize new leaders, there is a lot of work is still being done using leadership pipeline or traditional. How do you see that? How is the transformation here, not only for the leader itself, but the whole way that you think about people in organizations?
Yeah, I think, to quote Charles Handy, organizations are nothing without people. So whether you talk about GE Appliances, you talk about IBM, if the people don't show up, you've just got an inert set of machines and processes and buildings and chairs and so on and so forth. So literally people breathe life into the organization. Ironically, the tyranny of the tangible, the structures and processes that we put in place are typically put in place to maximize profitability on the last value opportunity that we saw. And then we harden around those particular structures, processes, and technologies to kind of open the jaws of profitability. In so doing, we kind of, as Dorothy Leonard Barton would say, that those core competencies that we build to maximize profitability in the prior instantiation of what we were looking to do to create and capture value, limit us from seeing the next thing and frustrate the people, because the people at the edge who might see a new opportunity, essentially, it's the inverse of what Kevin was talking about. They essentially have to go and strap on the armor to go back into their own organization to kind of pull people across functional silos, to work outside of the traditional functions to get something done, because I call this structural lag. We tend to be structurally out of phase with the reality in the marketplace on an ongoing basis because we get into this whole structural problem that I think Martin alluded to earlier. And so I kind of feel that, you know, if you have people who have that passion and motivation and they're given the autonomy, right, and the accountability on the other side. So there's aspiration. What's the shared aspiration that we want to achieve together? There's alignment in how I can find my own motivation towards that aspiration. There's autonomy in knowing that I'm allowed to apply my discretionary effort where I think I can add the most value. And then there's accountability, which is, and in so doing, I'm accountable for delivering. You get those four, you start to get this adaptability and agility to be able to kind of sense and respond at the edge rather than wait for permission from the middle. That requires a completely different framing of what leadership is. When we say leader, we tend to think about it as a person and a role. And I actually think in organizations, we have customer relationship systems, ERP systems, MRP systems, and I feel that organizations are leadership systems. And the one requirement for leadership that's universal, I believe, is followership, that people will follow you. And if you do the kind of work, organizational network analysis, to see, you know, there's the formal hierarchy and there's the informal network, and most work gets done through the informal network. And you ask people, who would you follow into a storm? Who would you want to be with during a major transformation? And what we find from that research is fully 30% of the people that other people would follow are not on any formal hierarchical succession plan. So we have this nebulous term called leadership that we tend to ascribe to the hierarchy. And when Kevin went to hire and said, "Show me the org chart," he was looking for who are the leaders in the pyramid that I can go talk to, and they couldn't find one. There's ways of X-raying organizations now where you can understand what the trust network looks like, or what the energy network looks like, or what the decision-making network looks like, or who the culture keepers are. And I feel that we have a far higher resolution set of technologies, back to Martin's point, where we can really understand who works with whom to get what done in a much more organic way, and that the leadership system, to Kevin's point, needs to support that organic flow. If you look at teams in general, right, this goes back to the work that Rob Cross did years ago, looking at consulting teams, and this we relate to Martin's business, that, you know, there are some teams that dramatically outperform others, just like we hear this with software as well. There's software teams that dramatically outperform others, and when you started to try to get to the core of what was that created a 10x differentiation in teams' performance, it was energy. I feel energy in working together. You can do that with the San Francisco basketball team. You can do that with a software team. It's that the group feels that they are contributing within and across. They're bringing their best selves to what it is, and they have a unique contribution. And if you can unlock what I call discretionary effort, what people do because they're compelled to, not because they're commanded to, that's what the kind of leadership system you need. And I think it's the one that Kevin was starting to articulate. However, in order for any of that to happen, going back to my time at IBM, it doesn't happen unless the formal leader in the hierarchy, instead of getting out of their helicopter, as Rita talks about, let's go to grow, behaves so differently that people say, whoa, this is for real, and I have permission, perhaps, to now exercise my discretionary effort. And when the first failure happens, that there's coverage for that failure, because there will be many failures, 249 to 1, according to Alex Osterwalder, if you want to run a portfolio of kind of possibility.
So, Claudio, I'm not sure
Go
if
ahead.
you'd be happy for me to be disruptive and jump in here to get some cross.
I would love it. That's what I would provoke you. Yes.
Oh no, Martin.
So, I think what are we talking about here? I think at one level we're talking about, changes in the world that require new ways of managing. I think the temptation is to say, not that way, this one way. And, I think a sort of maybe a more nuanced way of thinking about it is, in terms of calibrating trade-offs. So I think behind all of the new organizational forms and the supposed badness of the old organizational forms, I think there's a trade-off between autonomy and alignment going on. Clearly, if everything in the company was dictated by the market, there was no common instructions at all, anything could be reinvented at any time, you don't have a company. You have a rather chaotic market, which may be the answer in some cases, but probably not many. So you certainly need some alignment, but you also need some autonomy in a changing world where the hierarchy is just not fast enough to run things up and down the decision chain. So I think one question I'd like to put to Rita and Tony is how many ways do we have of balancing autonomy and alignment, whatever the structure, because we know that this is not a new problem, right? This was von Moltke in the Prussian military faced this problem in the 1870s, and he had an answer, which was commander's intent, which is give people a rough direction, but not precise instructions. And we know that NASA struggled with this to put a man on the moon. The engineering needed to work, but also they needed sort of learning when things went wrong, as it did on the Apollo 13 mission. So organizationally and strategically, what other ways do we have of understanding how to balance this?
Yeah, we can start with you, Rita. Yeah.
Well, I think you need both, right? I mean, if you take even children, right? What we know about human development is that there is a necessary amount of support, absolutely, but also challenge. And one of the dilemmas, I think, of human development is if you have just support, like everybody's above average and we all get awards for most improved and whatnot. If that's all you have, right, you never develop mastery. You never develop competence. You never develop that skill and that intuition that comes from trying multiple things and failing and learning and trying again and having the grit to stick with it. So I think if I take that analogy to organizations, there's a need to structure environments where there is both support. Yes, you get the resources that you need, you get the freedom that you hunger for, you get the ability to do things, but there's also challenge, right? There's rules you have to adhere to, and there's compliance you have to need to deal with. And, there's things that you have to be taken care of because you're part of the tribe, right? And so I think there's sort of this uber theme of you need both. And we constantly want to get away from it, right? We constantly say, oh, challenge. We don't even want to talk about that. Let's talk about the fun stuff, the sparklies.
Right, absolutely. I mean, there is the divergent part of innovation, new ideas and unleashing autonomy. But of course, you have to close down some stuff. You mentioned that as one of your principles. Rarely do you spontaneously have a group of people deciding, let's close down precisely that thing. A certain amount of alignment is necessary to make that sort of convergent decision. And I sometimes fear with all of the fashion around, agile approaches and so on, that we're just essentially talking about one element of the equation. Now, it's good to balance the discussion, to have that other element of the equation, but it's bad to believe that the equation is just just one side of it,
Well, and if you think about human beings dealing with uncertainty, we're terrible at it. We absolutely are terrible at it. We freeze, we don't know what to do. We get stuck. We don't make decisions. And, the dirty little secret of a lot of humanity is for a lot of people, they like having the structure. They like knowing this is the time I go to work, and this is the time we take lunch, and this is the time we take breaks. And, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think somehow we've gone way over on the other end, saying, everybody wants to come to work in black T-shirts and be creative. And, that's not everybody's cup of tea. I mean, there are people whose life, even at a very professional level, involves getting 1/4% of tolerance off of that particular specification. And that's what they thrive on. And I think we need to build organizations where we can have multiple sets of those things.
And Tony, that was like the theme of your book in a way, as I read it. You had these renegades in your in your manga novel that, that went against the traditional approaches, and but their approach was was the new norm in a sense, and presumably at some point that would require revolution too. So how did you in the thinking behind the manga, how did you think about balancing the forces of stability and structure with the forces of creative destruction?
Well, I think right on. And when we last talked about the book, you picked that out. You can only do one thing in a book, and I was trying to paint the picture of what the explore context looks like. Coming from Ireland, we have a saying: "There's horses for courses." Right? And so in the environment where outcome predictability is high and environmental certainty is high, bureaucracy rules.
It's awesome. Right?
It's like
Totally.
that is the system.
Silos are
silos rock. Yeah.
Amazing.
And those functions do what they do well, and the rules are set up, whether you're Weber or Fayol or whoever, like that's the model. And also I don't want the job of accounting to be done by an innovator, and I don't want the job of an innovator to be done by an accountant. And therefore, so I think the first error we make, and it goes back to what Rita was saying, is as human beings, and Kevin alluded to this, he said, we're on a path, but when we hit an impasse, the likelihood is to regress back to what we know. We're friendly with familiarity. The devil we know is better than the devil we don't. So our overarching tendency as human beings is to kind of go back to what we know, and biologically that happens too. Like the blood gets, if we have a position of fear, our executive function shuts down, and we think about freeze or flight. Mostly freeze these days, maybe not fight or flight. So the first problem is, Martin, to your context on you talked about context. I call this the X factor. What key are we in? Are we in the key of predictability? Are we in the key of stability? Are we in the key of environmental certainty? Rock the hierarchy, if you want to keep going with the music metaphor, or the orchestra. However, if we're in the key of uncertainty, and as we emerge from the liminality of COVID, we're not necessarily sure what the progression path is. We've had to let go of what we know, but we're still reaching for where we're going, and we don't know. There, it's massive experimentation. It's trial and error. So the first problem, I think, is that we unconsciously want to make the world simpler than it is. We don't recognize the depth of complexity or the rate of change that we're dealing with, the other two factors you talked about. So we kind of say, we miss the law of requisite complexity. We try to oversimplify things down, and then when we break it down beyond the level of complexity we're at, the solutions don't work. The second thing is, even if we acknowledge that the environment is complex, we still fall back into trying to do what we used to do harder. It's like yelling louder in English to somebody who speaks French and hoping they'll understand. The equipment, the tools, the structure, the process are not suited to the reality of the context we operate in. So absolutely right, Martin. What I was trying to paint in that book was a picture of what it's like to work in the explore side of the equation, when we're working more in a networked way, where we're unlocking discretionary effort. But those are not the people you want to be kind of trying to test every progression or idea that they come up with. You want the bureaucrats kind of killing that. Instead of, if you think about the bureaucracy as kind of killing things in the department of no, that's great, because if you've got to wean through 250 ideas to find one that's really going to add value, you kind of need to be very disciplined in killing things sooner, which is a lot of what Alex talks about. So there, I think the bureaucracy can have a huge impact in kind of weaning out, what won't work.
Yeah, I love the music analogy because, it's very intuitive. I mean, there's some music going on, and the musicians do need to coordinate, and there are different ways of doing that, right? If it's Beethoven, have a score and a conductor. If it's if Duke Ellington, then improvise. And we've got a new contender too, which is algorithmic music, which is maybe some of the music doesn't require anything from us. Well, it does, of course, select the algorithm. It's indirect control. But I think just reaching for one key or one way of playing music is bound to come unstuck under some circumstances. I mean, there is this beautiful mathematical proof, the No Free Lunch theorem, that shows that it's mathematically impossible to have a solution algorithm for all problems. Like there is no such thing as a universal answer. in any walk of life. If it's true of arithmetic, it's got to be true of everything else. But I sometimes think in management that we have serial fads which say the next thing is the entire answer to everything.
I think that's another key point, though, is to your point on technology, right? If we want to keep going with the music metaphor, the question then becomes, what are we organizing? And I think we're underestimating the organization of what I call the human-machine interface, because machines today have their own intelligence, and in microseconds they can uncover stuff that we can't. And I think our organizational kind of landscape needs to acknowledge the fact that we now need a human-machine interface that allows those algorithmic type of capabilities to perhaps go beyond, as you've mentioned, Martin, automation into almost automaticity, that the thing can run itself. But the thing that's required that humans can do better than anybody else is discernment and parsing context and kind of identifying frontiers. And if I may, back to your book, imagination, or seeing around corners, as Rita says, that I don't know that there's an algorithm for yet. So if we can free up the human part of the system to see around corners or imagine possible futures, while we allow the machine intelligence piece to kind of do its thing that we largely might have seen as mundane or kind of boring, I feel we have to think about that much more broadly than we have. And I know you've done a lot of work in that context, like down at the millisecond context, in understanding massive amounts of data, looking for patterns.
To say something controversial, maybe, in a sense, practitioners need to become academics. Because the thing is, the direct action of the practitioner may not be the only intervention. I mean, for instance, in the algorithmic space, we can't intervene directly. We can't operate at the speed of the algorithms, but we can have a theory about the system of ourselves plus the algorithms, and we can test those theories. We need to think at different levels in the system. Is this a direct action problem? Is this a sort of a partial planning problem? Rita, I like your approach of sort of planned discovery, planned exploration, partly structured, but you're not structuring the actual outcomes and activities. You're structuring the process. I think the more connected agents we have, and the faster things move, the less it will be susceptible to linear logic. In which case, we need ways of understanding and intervening into complex systems, which you can never do completely deductively. You can recognize patterns, right? You can say, in this sort of situation, this works. What key are we in, as you say, Tony? Or you can say, let me see if this thing works, and if it doesn't, let me try something else.
Yep. So we have 3 minutes to finish here. So maybe one way to think here. I mean, I got a lot of things. I see this tension: autonomy, alignment, efficiency, adaptability, stability, uncertainty that you need to recognize and manage. So what would be like an advice for all these people like watching this chat here, this conversation here, which are the points that you should be careful about? I mean, you cannot, like, as you said, Martin, innovate all the things and keep like things under control in your back. But I mean, which are the advice that so people could try new models, new ways to think about like how they operate in this environment? So maybe we could start with you, Rita, and go to Martin and Tony.
Sure. So there's no harm with your experimenting wherever you are in the organization, right? So there's no reason to have a miserable life at work. You can use your imagination, as Martin talks about, to come up with, imagine connecting with 4 or 5 people across the organization about something that's important to the customer that you could actually have an impact on. I mean, think about how much more enriching and interesting your job would be, whatever your job is, right? So I think there's that idea of you don't need to cede agency to them.
Love it. I love it. Yeah. Martin.
Well, I think one idea I'm finding quite powerful in sorting through this complex dynamic context of management is the idea of never confusing a mental model with a fact. Often we say, I have a 2% market share in the pharmaceuticals industry, and we think that's a fact. But who's ever in the pharmaceuticals industry? What market? How do we measure there's always something masquerading as a fact that's in fact a choice of a mental model. And by having alternative mental models and being choiceful about the models that we apply, rather than moving immediate to action, I think it forces us to invest slightly more time in sense making, which is an essential part of triaging situations in order to be able to do the right thing.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, and Tony.
I'd pick up on that and kind of add to it that I think there's kind of three big buckets that individuals and organizations and probably society at large needs to think about. Perceiving is how we frame things and understand what's going on. Sense making is how do we kind of, and I don't want to use the words break it down because that becomes too reductionist, but how do we make sense of what we're seeing? And that's why you need diversity of perspective in the perceiving phase, because you want to see it from multiple perspectives. And then last is choreography, because I feel today, as we move more into arenas, as Rita has so eloquently written about, and ecosystems, where it's an infinite game. The goal there is to create an ecosystem that lives in perpetuity, where each component of that ecosystem adds value, and each of the players in that game wants to stay in the game. It's not a finite game. It's an infinite game, and in that infinite game, there's reciprocity and give and take. And so perceiving, sense making, and choreography, I think, are kind of the new lenses through which sense making occurs. And whether that's an individual in an organization trying to make sense of where can I add value to the customer, whether that's an organization trying to make sense of with whom do I need to partner outside my existing industry to create heretofore unrecognized value, and then how do we do that in a way where there's a lot less inequality in society. Those seem to be the issues that we're dealing with right now.
No, I love that. I love it. I mean, there is so many things to talk here, and unfortunately we are short of time. So I want to really thank you. I mean, a lot of good insights that I will try to leverage with the practitioners that are coming next in the next session. So thank you, Tony. Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Martin. Thanks so much for making time to come here and talk to this group. I appreciate that.
Claudio.
I hope we can have this session sometime again.
Spend some time with my favorite academics, my favorite brains.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so welcome again. I hope you have enjoyed so many good sessions. Love Kevin Nolan, love Rita, Tony, Martin Reeves. I hope you had enjoyed this session as well. So for those joining right now, so welcome to the Beyond Hierarchy Summit. Now we are moving to people with skin in the game, people that are there in the companies, in the organizations, fighting for transformation. So I would love to invite here three great members of the Outthinker Strategy Network. So Michelle Micon, that is Vice President of Innovation, the Strategic Service at the Boston Globe Media. Rich Haas, Vice President Business Model Innovation at Kyndryl, that is the formerly IBM's Infrastructure Services business. And Adam Zalisk, Senior Vice President at Amplify. So before we start with questions about the topic, I would love to get 1 minute of each of you so you can explain a bit your business, for those that don't know it. So let me start with Michelle. Michelle, if you could quickly explain what Boston Globe Media does.
Sure. The Boston Globe Media has a couple of different properties in their portfolio. Of course, Boston Globe, which most people know. It's 150 years old this year, actually. Boston.com and Stat News, and a recently launched product called the B-Side. So
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. So Adam, if you could explain Amplify to our guests here.
Of course. Good to see you, Claudio, and Michelle and Rich. So Amplify Education is an education technology company. We're a next generation curriculum and assessment company. We build rich instructional products that are anchored in evidence-based practice about how to teach science, English, and mathematics. And we're serving around 10 million students around the country and increasingly around the world.
Thank you so much, Adam. So Rich, your time to explain.
Yeah, my apologies if I go over by a little bit. And it's a pleasure being part of this discussion. So as Claudio mentioned, my name is Rich Haas. I'm the global leader for business model innovation at Kyndryl. And if you haven't heard of Kyndryl, no worries. We're a relatively young company, but have an extended heritage. Claudio mentioned we're the former infrastructure services business of IBM. And I always joke around a little bit by saying we're a startup with a revenue of about $18 billion, more than 4,000 customers, 90,000 employees, spread across 63 different countries. Doesn't sound like a startup, but in essence, we have that startup mentality, having spun out of IBM back at the tail end of last year for multiple different reasons, which we'll probably get into here. But that spin out, in essence, presages and sort of underscores the importance of that thinking around young company, new company, startup type mentality.
No, that's great. That's good. Thank you. Thank you for making that. So that makes easier to get the guests here and understand what you do. So first question is, we have all these big insights here, zero distance from clients, make the internal functions of an organization functioning like more marketplace, business ecosystems where you have these kind of partners and alliance, whatever, to offer a better experience for customers and clients. So it looks like all fascinating. A lot of innovation happening in the enterprise level. So suppose I'm a chief strategy officer and executive trying to make this transformation. So where should I start? And I would love to, of course, base that on your personal experience. It's not easy. We know that. It's very challenging to make transformation for organizations that are there operating in one mindset. But where should I start? So let me start with you, Rich. You're the last one to introduce yourself. Let's go first with you, and we go to Michelle and Adam.
Yeah, sure. And my apologies if I go a little bit long-winded on this one. I think it's a very important question. I think it really starts first and foremost with clarity around the need for a different approach. Basically, in my mind, sort of answering three general questions that help steer the thinking. The first question really is, how quickly is innovation happening in your market? The second question really gets to what's driving the innovation. And the third question is really around, where is innovation coming from? And the answers to those questions can help inform how you move forward and where to start. So, for instance, if a market is undergoing rapid innovation, then you may not have the luxury of time. You'll need to move much more quickly, maybe more quickly than you're comfortable with moving. If innovation is coming through new technology, then you'll have to gear yourself around either the investments or partnerships to provide that innovation that's demanded in the marketplace. And if innovation is customer-led, you need to get ahead of that or intersect with it in some fashion. Otherwise, the customers will outpace you. Now, if I reflect sort of to my own experience for Kyndryl, we're coming from that environment where we were a captive entity within a larger technology firm, IBM. That worked when speed of technological change, in essence, was relatively moderate. We could wrap our services around technology or a technology set offered predominantly from one company. Now, the market changed, though, in some pretty profound ways. And when I say market, the technology underpinnings and the market dynamics changed quite a bit. You get a proliferation of technologies that our customers were adopting and are dealing with and trying to get help with. You have a rapid change in major market themes, such as the move to public cloud, edge computing, other things. And simply put, if I reflect on sort of our own experience, we needed freedom of action to provide the services around those technology stacks that best served our customers' needs, as well as innovation in a more distributed way. So we needed to make that sort of classic shift almost, or pivot from an integrated model to a federated model. And through our spin-out from IBM, we're able to do that and establish those partnerships with the world's leading technology firms. So I think it's really first and foremost getting clarity on sort of those three questions at the outset. Identify how quickly innovation and change is happening in your marketplace, and then internalize that for your organization to understand what changes do you need to make in order to be able to be relevant to your customers and in the marketplace.
No, I love it. I love it. It connects with what Martin Reeves say, that is, you need to understand the context. Not necessarily you need to have very innovative organic model. Sometimes bureaucracy can happen depending the context that we are. So let's go to Michelle. Michelle, what you bring him in, what would be your advice in this sense?
My advice, and where I've had some experiences, if there's a desire for innovation and it can be sometimes hard to figure out a larger strategy for it, I think what Rich said is spot on. My experience is if you're starting really small and you're okay taking some of those risks and don't have all the answers, is just to start, because start but keep it close. Sort of what has worked in my career is working on projects where there's a really small list of stakeholders or a venture committee or however you want to call it. But if somebody internally, say in a company, has an idea, let them run with it and learn from there how you want to interact, how you want to resource, how wide to spread the news when something happens. Every organization's so different, and it's hard to figure out that stuff out at the very beginning. So in the early stages, kind of let it be really organic, but notice and communicate and be open to what's happening to try to learn for the second time and the third time what worked and what didn't. So while it can be really important to figure out as much as you can early on, I find that starting just gets it going, and then other people see innovation happening and want to jump on the bandwagon. And I think there's some benefits to that.
Okay, no, that's good. That's good. Thank you. So let's go to Adam. Adam, how do you complement your colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, so much to agree with in what Rich and Michelle said. I think they've given a really terrific description of how to sort of size the initiative to the needs of the organization and the industry you're operating in. The only thing I'd add is that I think when kicking off this kind of effort, it's so often useful to think about what is the limiting factor that's going to determine our success or not. And in these cases, it strikes me our ability to articulate the need in broad theoretical terms is probably not going to be the limiting factor. Even our ability to get senior executives and colleagues bought in, that may take some work. But the real limiting factor, and as I listened to the session that came before this one, strikes me as the actual protagonists, the talent that is ready to bring entrepreneurialism, energy, curiosity, velocity to projects, in a way that is going to galvanize their colleagues and create proof points of a new way of working. And so the only thing I'd add to the way that Rich and Michelle outlined first steps is that it strikes me that one of the most important first steps is to improve our own capability for identifying and harvesting that talent, the people in the organization who can be the real successful protagonists behind these initiatives.
I love that. I mean, the limiting factors. So I tell quickly one experience that I had in my previous job, in some jobs that I had in the past, that was we need to become more innovative. There was like a new organization design that was put in place, and that gave more autonomy to small like business units that were like the same company, but they gave like, okay, this market here or this region here, so you have more autonomy, you should work like this. And there was a lot of training, instrumentalization, how they could work together, and things started running. And 6 months later, we were coming back to see the evolution. It was almost nothing, almost nothing. And at the end, we did a lot of investigation till one day someone said something to us that say, hey, it looks like we are still waiting for the others to come from the top. And that comes to me, the thing about like organizational culture, that is, people are so used with the hierarchy. We're so used to easily get the others and know what to do in their jobs, that it was difficult to change. It's funny because before that they were complaining about autonomy. I want more autonomy, and autonomy was given, but nothing really happened. So I would love to explore with you. I mean, there is this big topic of organizational culture. People are used to do things in the same way. So how we should think that? That's usually a very big limiting factor. You give more protagonism, but sometimes it's difficult to get that moving. How do you react to that? So let's start again. I mean, Michelle, maybe you first this time.
I think that what I would say is it's often finding an idea. I hear you. I think sometimes it can be that you have the desire, but you can't change the behavior that quickly. I think it's about, in my experience, if people are rallied around an idea that has some energy, and there's even just one person that's willing to kind of step out, it can create momentum. The other thing that has worked is, if you're not seeing movement because the culture maybe doesn't permit it, or this is new, is trying a couple different meeting types, or one-on-one sessions with that person to help kind of get it started. I hope I'm answering your question directly, but I think it's kind of that grassroots, like we have to try something different. So if a normal kickoff meeting doesn't work, we got to try, how do we meet with that person, protagonist or multiple protagonists, and find out what the barriers are. Do they just need encouragement, or they need permission? Everybody's wired a little differently. So I think it's that kind of one-on-one interaction in some cases to find out what is the barrier and trying to.
Yeah. I love that, because sometimes we kind of like have this waterfall mindset to implement things, that is, it's all at once. We change everything. Everybody had a new thing, but there was no maybe moving force, an example or something that could help them. But I would love to hear you too as well. I mean, let's go, Adam. How do you react to this situation? What would you recommend?
When we're trying to make these changes, I feel like all the risk is on the side of not being specific enough about the behaviors that we want to change.
Yep.
And sometimes I think we avoid that because the behavior changes can seem quite mundane, can also feel quite scary because they deviate so profoundly from what we're used to. And so, I think forcing us to go from the terms of concept, entrepreneur, decentralized innovation, to the specific changes that we want to see our colleagues and team members make behaviorally. How you're used to starting a project by building this multi-year forecast and rolling out an NPV and comparing it to our hurdle. Don't do any of that this time. Or even at the level of, how you're used to spending 25% of your time providing visibility about this project to executives and ensuring that all of our functional areas are bought in and consulting them. you know what, we're giving you freedom within these parameters to not do any of that and to reclaim that 20% of your time. Those may not even be specific enough. I think the more precise we can be about the changes that we're giving our colleagues, the opportunity to take on, the more likely we are to actually see those.
Yeah, no, I see that. I think sometimes you need to go to a level of granularity that people can, oh, I know now, I do now, I can try now. So, Rich, how's been your experience? I mean, you are in the middle of like a big transformation. It's just the fact of getting off the IBM structure is a big one. But love to hear you.
Yeah, and totally agree with Adam's comments in terms of, oftentimes we find ourselves not being specific enough in the type of changes we want in the behaviors. Just to add to the comments that both Michelle and Adam have made, naturally, culture is a very important piece to any sort of transition and any sort of change program that you have. You can't just put structures like internal marketplaces in place or move to a decentralized model and then say to folks, all right, everyone, be more innovative, lead the change. It just doesn't work that way. To a degree, people are conditioned by their past collective behavior. There obviously needs to be a focus in terms of the hearts and minds of winning people over, in essence. Part of that has to do as well with being specific and enabling people to see sort of their futures in the transition and in the future state that you're trying to get to. And importantly, you want to ensure that you can encourage people in distributed environments to take the initiative. Kyndryl, the way we're doing this is through a sustained culture transformation and a set of behaviors that we call the Kyndryl Way, where we have several key tenets and elements. Some of those, just to mention them, are around restless to continuously anticipate, learn, and innovate, or being flat to empower accountability and operate as an inclusive team. And that has to be continuously reinforced, as well as ensuring that you have champions in your organization that you can point to, that you can, in essence, say, this is what our future is supposed to be like in terms of the behaviors, so that people can model those behaviors to a degree. But completely agree with the comment in terms of oftentimes, we're not specific enough, and that's a general statement. The greater we can be in terms of a degree of specificity on how people's lives will change and the behaviors that we want to move towards, the better. Hey, Claudia, I think you're on mute.
So sorry. Yeah, sometimes you just get distracted. So there is another component of like this big change that I've seen a lot in literature and in real life as well, in real case. That is, one thing is definitely the culture. You need to get people engaged and moving to the new behaviors. But another thing is that there is a learning curve. There is a learning curve that takes time sometimes. So for example, another situation that I saw that we were like, hey, people, the model is not delivering. So when we went to see people, it was just that they were not getting used yet. I mean, it takes time. They were receiving training until you get back to like extract the productivity level that the new model is supposed to bring. Takes some time. And when you talk about innovation, or we talk about like more organic models, that is even more difficult because it's abstract. Usually the outcomes of this model comes sometimes years, after that. So and we have investors, shareholders, all like trying to see what's coming. How do you see that? I mean, do you usually bring like this time perspective to projects that you're implementing? Do you bring like, hey, how long will you expect people to come? And that eventually will mean lower productivity as people are learning to get there, just to see how you react to that. So we can go with Adam and again, go back to Michelle. Yep.
I feel like there's a kind of qualitative and a quantitative angle on that, Claudio.
Yep.
The quantitative angle in my mind is we need to be extremely clear with all of our stakeholders about the risk parameters that we're establishing in taking on these new practices. There's kind of a capital allocation question of how much are we putting against very nascent and speculative efforts, and and recognizing publicly that in changing these behaviors, we may not seek to change them first in our more mature, large-scale projects where there's significant customer commitments and a higher risk profile and visibility. So I think the first step in gaining comfort and alignment is being very clear on the risk trade-offs that we're making in a way that we can quantify. I think there's then a second step, which is how is this just going to feel different? And especially for executives who are used to a polished presentation, who are used to a detailed business plan before we press go on the first prototype, who are accustomed to a set of behaviors that may look more like the old culture than the one that we are trying to embody. I think we need to be specific and honest about how these changes are going to feel different in the day-to-day, and provide, instead of saying, well, all of that is going away, provide a replacement to it that shows the discipline of projects, but perhaps enables them to be more decentralized and autonomous. What are the stage gates you can expect? When's the next time you're going to hear from this team? What are they testing right now, and what would success look like in 3 months? So I would take it both from the angle of what is at risk financially and how are we being intentional about those choices, and from the perspective of how is just the way we work together going to feel different, and how can we anticipate those changes going forward?
No, love it. Michelle, how do you react to that? And that one thing is one specific just to add here, that is, it looks like there is a supporting system required to these things. Just want to hear from you, Michelle.
I do think there's a supporting system needed. I also, just to answer your initial question, think that it is good to approximate a date by which you want something to happen, whether it's a month or a year or 2 years, whatever.
Yep.
Mostly so that it continues to happen and there continues to be momentum and you're sending a signal that it's important. But patience and flexibility are really important there, particularly if it's something that's never been done before. You might have to change those time expectations wildly. So, for example, if there's a group meeting about a status on a project, just along the lines of what Adam was saying about the feeling of the project and how it feels different, reminding people that there's patience and flexibility needed, which might be different than a normal sort of rigid calendar that one follows. You probably have to remind people of that every time, because their default is going to be how the company normally operates, and this might be feel really different. And that feeling is important so that people are kind of filtering their thoughts and ideas differently than they normally would, which is sort of the power of this whole entrepreneurial idea within a larger ecosystem. I don't know if I answered your last question.
No, yes, my last question is, because there is a personal struggle, to make this movement, and even for example, I can tell about myself how I felt when I was sometimes in my career, and is, hey, okay, I need to change that. I need people maybe is patient about the changes that I need, but I still think that they're observing me and kind of judging me. And that of course affect my career, affect my expectations to move. So it's all about should we have this supporting system reinforcing? How do you make sure that people are evolving, but we are observing and helping them to do that? Yes.
I think that support system, let me just add one thought. I think that support system is needed. It might be a different support system than what normally goes on. So I worked on a project once where the person didn't sit in the core function, but they had this fantastic idea. So while we might take for granted they know what resources to go to answer a problem, I think we had to, the internal innovation team really had to connect those dots for this individual to say, this is a resource and this is a resource, because they just weren't aware of it. And sometimes in working on an entrepreneurial project, you take for granted the whole company's there to help, but they might not have those connections. So I think introducing those elements when you see them is important.
Okay. No, thank you. So, Rich, how do you respond to the same question?
Yeah, so I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record. My apologies, folks.
No
But I
problem.
think I really think it gets down to, in some respects, clarity on two things, which are metrics and timeframes. Regarding metrics, there may be several top-level metrics that are the same across your current and future models, but there will likely be some key ones in essence that are different, and that's something really where a lot of thought has to be put into. What's really different on the future model, on the future state you're trying to get to, and what are the metrics that in essence reflect that, different from the model you have today. On timeframes, I think it's important to set realistic expectations. That's not novel. I think everyone will agree with that. It's rare that big changes sort of have an immediate positive impact. If they do, you take them. But it's rare that the big changes that you have in your companies and your corporations will have that immediate impact. We need to be honest when we set those expectations. If it takes 1 to 2 years for a change, we should put that out there. The clock starts ticking in essence, and we have something of a grace period where we can do the heavy lifting to get to our goals. I think the other point as well, to pick up on something that Michelle had mentioned, as you're going through that sort of change, there needs to be greater tolerance for potential missteps as you transition. Mistakes happen. Fix them locally, then apply the learnings globally. Otherwise, if there's not tolerance, if there's a lack of tolerance, the negative stimulus tends to stick with people and organizations. So the next time you try a change, people are going to ask themselves, why should I stick my neck out? I'll do what I did for the last however many years because it's safe. And that's exactly the behavior that you don't want to have happen. So there's a need in essence for tolerance around mistakes. Like I say, fix them locally, apply the learnings globally, and then move forward.
Okay, love it. There's a point here, a question. Let me see if I show that from Kevin that is watching us. So, is there a notion of truly autonomous innovation project teams? He feels that there is a need for a steering committee that provides support to the project teams, even if the most agile teams or decentralized organization. So the question is, where in the organization should that governance and support layer belong? So that's what Kevin is asking us. It's connected with like this autonomy alignment that Martin Reeves was commenting. I would love to hear from you. How do you see that? Because more and more we see organizations experimenting, trying to innovate, trying new things. But how do you give more autonomy to people as well, so they can innovate close to the client? In this sense of zero distance from the client. How do we see governance playing a role here in your experience? So what would be your recommendations? So Michelle, you first this time.
My experience with this is that innovation teams or support teams in this case that sit independently from any other functional group and can sort of work with anyone. That's been my experience. I haven't worked with a lot of other models, but I will say it's worked well because there's a degree of, they have some stake in it. They have a stake in the learning and the success of the experiment, but not necessarily in the functional piece or wherever the function sits, where the idea is coming from. So, and there's a value to that innovation team applying the same logic to multiple projects so that the company can learn. So I think I'm answering it, but my experience is that when it sits independently and can kind of plug into any group, that has worked in my experience.
Okay. So, Rich, how do you react to that? Governance is always an important stuff. And I have a following question after that regarding the same topic, but let's hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I picked up on a phrase in the question as well, sort of the layer of coordination. Where does that plug in appropriately? And that's really, dependent on what that project is, what that initiative is. Obviously a corporation needs to be able to align its resources and provide the appropriate resources for the projects that are going to have the maximum amount of impact. So there's a degree of prioritization there. If you're talking about a project that has, for instance, a broad impact, broad scope, but as well, the other consideration in this is to think through how the rest of the organization is going to react. The layer of coordination may be fairly high in the company, where there's key senior leaders who may understand the projects that are going on and is able to allocate resources as necessary, but it's not known by the broader corporation for many different reasons. If you're talking about sort of an individual project, an innovation project that you're running, with potentially a customer specifically, where the bounds and scope of what's being, innovated around, or the topic that's being innovated around, there could be, broader participation across the organization, and the role really of that layer of coordination is much further down in the corporation. But I think one key piece in here as well is, oftentimes when I reflect on sort of past experience, this question comes up in terms of how will the rest of the organization react to the project that you launch. You can almost think of almost an organism, and almost T cells and antibodies. If it's anathema to what the rest of the corporation is doing, you can imagine that the rest of the corporation is sort of going to fight it a little bit. But if it's the direction really that the corporation is supposed to move in that represents the future state, you have to nurture it, you have to protect it in a way as well, give it the resources that it needs, the project the resources that it needs, but make sure that you're also protecting it from those antibodies and T cells, making sure that you can actually prove out the idea before exposing it too broadly. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was connecting that with the first point that Adam made about the kind of immunity system, the limiting factors, in the organization. And I was wondering if like governance could eventually become, not become, but be one of them, because they're also used with like old mindsets, old way of tracking things and, milestones. Sometimes when you're trying innovation, new business models, there's a lot of abstraction that you're not sure. You have assumptions, hypotheses. So, but coming back, Adam, how do you connect this piece? I think Rich brought a piece of that. What is the challenge with governance?
This might be a little bit of a synthesis of what Michelle and Rich said, really, but I think, of course, the specifics of the right structure are contextual to the organization and its size and the initiative and all of that. But what we can probably say in general is that we want the lightest weight governance solution that addresses the problems that we need governance to address for the initiative, and I think those are. One, clarity of purpose. So we need to be giving our teams the broad compass for what we believe as an organization will create value for our customers and therefore for the enterprise. We need to provide resources in a fast, agile way when they're needed. And then we need to provide the visibility within the broader organization so that when and if the initiative is successful, it can kind of step ladder to the next stage of resource and development. And if we can do those three things, then the lightest weight way of doing them with the least involvement and kind of risk of bureaucracy or distraction for the team that we've tasked with this innovation project feels like the right solution to me.
No, I really like that. Summarizing here, it looks like to me that there is a shift here that is we don't expect the governance structure just to come to audit me and control me and see if I'm reaching to targets, but I wanted them to have a very important function here to help us understand where we are and give support sometimes with resource, with ideas, with whatever that is necessary to move through the direction of this purpose that is clear. Is that make sense? Clarity of purpose in the supporting system, that governance is part of that. Does it make sense? Yeah, that's good. That's good. So there's another question here, and that's a very interesting question. I will try to brief. I mean, Vitaly is suggesting here. So how do we shift beliefs in mindset fast in that scale? I mean, I will just give you a quick opinion and see how you react to that. That sometimes my sensation is that there is a confusion about agility. That is agility. You have like a process that makes you get to stage faster, but not necessarily means that the speed are in the micro time, micro period. Can you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes it's longer, but it's the fast path to get to the results. So there's, for me, this confusion of being agile and fast, but against speed, if you can understand me, speed in the sense that, you need to execute for today. Can you understand what I say? So how do you react to this question? I mean, how do you shift beliefs on mindset and fast and scale and bring this point that I bring here, that is agile maybe is, or what we want in organizations is more like a process that gets us faster to a place, not necessarily saying that people need to execute quickly or so on and so forth, because there's a learning, so on and so forth. So Rich, starting with you, I mean, how do you react to this question?
Yeah, so I think we already talked a lot about sort of clarity of purpose, metrics, timeframes, and so on. The thought I'd add to that is really, in order to have this sort of be a self-sustaining, fast process, we also need to think about this from the perspective of being able to build in the opportunity for quick wins and celebrate those wins when they happen. There's a certain momentum around wins that almost becomes infectious. And I've been mentioning T cells and antibodies, now infection. I did not study biology, by the way. But when people see glimmers of the future, it can produce a positive feedback mechanism where more people want to be part of the change, and it sort of starts creating this snowball effect of more people get involved, more people move quickly, have ideas, and then basically iterate. And that sort of quick wins by being able to build a project or a large scale transformation that embeds quick wins and then celebrates those quick wins, in essence helps to speed along the process as well, because people start seeing what does the future look like, and they start feeling good about where that future is going.
Love it. Yes. No, I love this idea of having the quick wins and connect with that. So Michelle, what would you bring here as well?
I mean, sort of information and application is what I've seen work. So it's one thing to, read about all the application, all the things that artificial intelligence can do for us, but to find, if possible, a closer an example of how something's worked in your industry or a business that's like yours, I feel like in my experience has been able to get people to believe that not only can it be done, it can be done by us as this type of organization. I realize that's not always possible if you're innovating on something pretty far out there, but most innovation in my experience is closer in. And so sometimes there's an example that can show people that it's possible, and then it's a matter of making it your own and changing the culture of the company to still execute it. But any examples that are even remotely relevant can be helpful to make people understand that things are possible in practical terms.
Oh, I love that. I mean, examples are instructive, in the sense of giving a real case, so people can mirror themselves and big questions. Yeah, I love that. Yes. And Adam, anything to add here to this question?
I would just say, again, telling people exactly what we expect, getting as clear on the behaviors so that we can call each other on when we're doing them or not doing them. And then what I hear in part of what Michelle and Rich just said is a practice of really vivid storytelling about where those behaviors have been applied in ways that have created value for the company. Yeah. And I think that's actually easier said than done. There's real communications work that's required to make sure that our leaders and executives are telling those stories in the same way time and again, and connecting them back to the very specific behaviors that we want to see one another do. And I think the more that we can drive that flywheel of positive example and specific takeaway, the more that we can, again, call each other on when we're doing it in practice or not.
No, I agree. And this storytelling piece is, I think, is very important. In some conversation we had recently in your network, I mean, that was an important topic. That was how we are not trained to storytell. I mean, to involve people through storytelling. So, and I want to bring like this point of storytelling because one usually big struggle that we discuss through the network is about like shareholders. So independently, if you're like a family owned or a private owned, like private equity or kind of any kind of arrangement, or a public, that's sometimes is even more difficult. One big challenge is convincing people with diverse set of expectations that we are trying something that will make a huge difference. So we've seen in the past a lot of organizations going private, one ownership to make that shift. We've seen some recently as well. But shareholders usually is a very important component where we need to tell a very good story to change. I mean, how has been your experience here? I mean, without then sometimes shifts, like this one that we saw at GE Appliances, or those that we had a conversation with the Rita, Tony, and Martin, are very difficult. How's been your experience? How are your recommendations how to connect with shareholders and sell them this story that we want to deliver to get more autonomy, more like innovation, and move forward. So, Rishi, do you mind to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think at first and foremost, you have to define who the stakeholders and shareholder audiences are that you're trying to communicate this. Then I think it goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about. I love the idea of the focus on storytelling. It's important to be able to have that clarity of vision where you're trying to get to, what the purpose is, and then what the role of the individual is within that sort of effort. And then along the way, there are going to be those moments of truth, of when you have, to use the words earlier, quick wins, of instances where you can show positive examples of the change. And as you do that for each one of the constituencies and articulate that in that storytelling, you can back up sort of the vision, the descriptions that you've had at the outset with actual proof points to say, hey, these are examples of where we're changing, where we're making progress, what we're doing. And then that feeds into the thought of once you're able to actually show that you're making a positive change, positive trajectory, more people will believe in that change and want to be part of it for the success of the company.
Yeah, I love like Tony is chatting here with us, Tony O'Driscoll, and he says, hey, we need both story and science to drive change. He says Martin Luther King did not say, I have a plan. He shared, I dream that could find this everything. So Adam, how do you react like to this relationship with shareholders and how to get them on board in the change that you need?
Well, we've talked a lot about forward-looking stories and examples of once we kick off the initiative, what are the proof points and the quick wins,
Yep.
To Rich's point. I'd also take us backwards. In any organization, we can find examples of folks who have nurtured impressive entrepreneurial projects, endeavors, and we can find examples of promising projects that have faltered. And I think often one of the most vivid ways to define the conditions we want to create in the organization for entrepreneurial, innovative activities like the ones we're talking about in this conversation are to look at those two examples. What went right in terms of who the individual was leading the project and how they were managed and supported and engaged by the organization when it's really worked, and the flip set of questions where it hasn't. And I think that can give us a platform for change and a clarity about what we're doing that's rooted sort of not in theory, but in real examples and people and things that we've seen among our colleagues.
No, I love that. And Michelle, anything to add here?
I think what I would add is when your initial prompt made me think literally of publicly traded companies and how they have paid shareholders that have invested their money. And, typically a shareholder events, there's very concrete results being shared. And often in innovation projects, particularly early on, my experience is there isn't, of course, if there are quick wins, great, share them, but also it could be a matter of saying, we don't have the stats yet to share, but we want to share the vision, and then using, to the point of storytelling, different devices to do that, to sort of change the expectation that it's not going to be like the thing that we always share with you. It's not going to have X, Y, and Z in a defined time period. It's going to be this journey we go on together, and here's why.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yes, I love that. So we are at the end of the session. Maybe just to finish here, I would love to ask you, I mean, what advice would you give? I think we said that along the thing, but what would be the first advice you would give to those people venturing in innovate the enterprise? Innovate like the way they are organized, innovate and bring more elements of an organic organization in place. So, Michelle, maybe starting with you, going to Rich and Adam.
I think Rich might have said this at the top, but figuring out where the innovation is coming from, and figuring out what the source is now with new ideas, and then first looking there as the place to start. In various companies I've worked in, it was the employees that had the wealth of ideas. So internal events to crowdsource ideas is a good center of energy. And then you end up having people that are your ambassadors for change and for newness. So figuring that out in each organization, I think, is key.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate the questions that I posed at the upfront. How quickly is innovation happening in your market? What's driving innovation? And then where's that innovation coming from? The advantage that a large corporation has is a lot of creative people are part of that corporation. And if you have a lot of clients, you're touching a lot of different environments, a lot of different companies. And each one of those touch points, in essence, can be, a source for innovation going forward. But I think really when you step back and you think about, where you start with innovation on your journey, how you organize around that, it really gets down to, how quickly is innovation happening, what's driving it, and then where is innovation coming from? And then layer on top of that, some of the conversation we've had here around culture will inform, how quickly and in which directions you can move. And then that'll also inform what you have to do as a company to influence that culture, to nudge it in that right direction.
Love it. Adam, your turn.
Two thoughts. One is just underscoring about talent. I think that, looking for, as Michelle said, the places where this is happening is often about looking for the people who are already doing it and who embody the qualities, experiences, skills, knowledge, and networks that will enable the concept that we're talking about today to be successful in the organization. And that, to me, seems like the linchpin of everything. A last sort of thought that this conversation has prompted me, especially since we're with a bunch of folks who are strategy leaders in their organizations, is that often I think executives in general, and maybe strategy leaders sort of most of all, respond to decentralization as a kind of demotion, a sense of, oh, well, I was planning everything up until now, and now other people are going to plan it, I suppose. What is left? And I would just say it strikes me that really the opposite is true, that it is it puts more onus on leadership to be incredibly specific about how we think that we're going to create value for customers and therefore for the enterprise in such a way that it can, with very limited communication, be picked up by leaders who are much closer to the specific problems we want to solve across the organization. And I think making that distinction to our leaders who are going to embark on this project, not a demotion, actually a promotion and a more of a platform to be increasingly specific and concise is a really important part of success.
I love that. I think it's the best end of this session is how do you promote yourselves to a new software, a new way to operate, how do you build a new way to understand what is a promotion for the organization, not only for yourself. That means you need to think about how you get this demotion, for a new kind of role as a strategy or as an executive. I love that. So That's great. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We end here our session. So Adam, thanks so much. Michelle, thanks so much. Rich, thanks so much. I look forward to collaborating with you next year as well.
Thank you.
Same here. Thank you.
That's great. So we are ending our session today. I want to thank you so much for all of you that joined today. So many insights here. For me, I mean, these tensions that the thought leaders comment about autonomy, alignment, efficiency, adaptability, stability, and certainty, and how you can play around that, to create like more efficient organization for a constant changing world are key. That's the thing that keeps in my mind all the time. So I want to thank you as well for Thinkers 50 and the Business Ecosystem Alliance to partner with us. For those that don't know these institutions, Thinkers 50 is the only credible ranking of thought leaders that I know. So if you want to see which are the best management thinkers around the world, go to Thinkers 50, go to the website, try to understand more. And the Business Ecosystem Alliance, that is an institution that is looking for this evolution. We are seeing organizations that they are operating more through ecosystems than in isolation. There is a different model to compete, to perceive the world. I would go there to look to all the research and all the things that they are creating. So that these are very interesting things. So, and Outthinker, if you don't know Outthinkers, go to our website. We are a strategy network, an invitation-only strategy network for executives that run strategy in large corporations around the world. More than glad to have a conversation with you if you think it's interesting. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank all the participants, and I will close the event now. Okay. Bye to all. Looking forward to see you again.